Chapter 3076. Ning Shu planned to move, but he was tight on money. However, Fu Yiji was already dead, so it should be fine to stay here. Everything was done in secret, so they would not suspect a weak girl like her. At most, it would lead to those big shots. The system's mechanical voice sounded in his mind, mission completed, leaving the world. Ning Shu was stunned. Could it be that the client's wish was to kill Fu Yiji? If he knew earlier, he would have killed Fu Yiji, or made the Marquise suffer. Ning Shu was forced to leave the world and return to the system space. The mission was finally completed. Ning Shu asked the system, will she go back? No memories, no future. If she went back, it would be a new life. If she did not go back and directly went to the afterlife, then she would have wasted half of her life. The system said, she should go back. Ning Shu asked again, why did the mission suddenly finish? The system said, before the mission enforcer went back, she said that it was probably because that person died, and the big stone in her heart was suddenly removed, and she could breathe freely again. So, she still wanted Fu Yiji to die. He did not know what happened, but from what Ning Shu understood, Fu Yiji was a person who looked calm on the surface, but was extremely stubborn on the inside. Moreover, he was arrogant. After being praised for a long time, he could easily obtain anything. This kind of stubbornness would inevitably implicate others. The client probably killed him to silence him, and in the matter of exchanging identities, the Marquise was probably involved. Ning Shu opened the status panel. Name, Ning Shu. Age, 27. Level, Super Mission Enforcer Points card, 237 plus 5, 10 million points per card. Soul value, 31 plus 1 life value, 28 plus 1 wisdom, 39 plus 1 luck, 25 plus 1 charm, 15 plus 1 spiritual power, 40 plus 1 martial strength, 28 plus 1 qualifications, 36 faith, 20,000 merit, 15,000,000 soul strength, 11 authorization ticket, 0 pure heart, none law comprehended. Water law incarnation, wood law incarnation, space law incarnation, constructed world, reincarnation world items, calm aura, heart calming pill, amulet 4, upgraded amulet plus 2, faith bell honorary titles, goddess of war, selfless ancestor skills, 5th ring shooting technique, intermediate fighting technique, intermediate level poison technique, beginner level business management knowledge, beginner level code programming, beginner level lawyer skill, sage ghost catching skill, beginner level cooking skill, intermediate level embroidery skill, trash hypnosis aura, mother of the world, queen's blessing, sister model worker, Chen Chi's blessing, leader aura, grass blessing, best friend for life, Meow. Meow Meow's blessing, healer of the dying, Zhu Susu's blessing, founding woman, Chen Ermiai's blessing, beauty in law, Chen Ning's blessing, bane of the blood clan, Jasmine's blessing, transcending race communication, Bai Sanyang's blessing, brave heart, Wang Ying's blessing, bloodthirsty tyrant, Ni Bingyan's blessing, heart of peace and joy, luck halo, faith halo, and longevity. Completed Shout Saishan's wish. Mission completion rate, 100%. Total mission rewards, 5-point cards, 7 attribute points, 60% soul power, 4,000 faith, including previous world's accumulation. Ning Shu looked at the points and the attribute points. What a pitiful amount of points. These were the real points. The ones given before were all fake. 80% soul power, but it didn't feel like it was more than 80%. It was only 60% now, but it was more than 80% before. Ning Shu kept the soul power. His current soul strength didn't need to absorb soul power. Let's go take a look at the law of nothingness. When it came to the law of nothingness, Ning Shu felt a headache. He had already entered the law of nothingness and was floating in the air. There was no place to step. Anyway, the law of nothingness was already very big. It was like an ocean. Ning Shu had to fly for a while to reach the end. It would take a lot of time to go around it. Ning Shu threw the star stones into the law of nothingness. There wasn't even a splash. Ning Shu also didn't feel the peerless martial art asking him for help. He touched the peerless martial art and didn't feel anything strange. Ning Shu could only comfort himself. It was good news that there was no movement. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to react in time. He went to the world of reincarnation to check on the soul fluid. He set up an array and also made a pool of star stones. Ning Shu walked in and took a look. The pool was clean and there was nothing in it. He didn't collect any soul fluid either. Ning Shu, this was awkward. He spent so much money but didn't get anything. Maybe it was because there weren't many souls in the world of reincarnation without consciousness. Ning Shu set up an array that could prevent other souls from stealing the soul fluid. It wasn't easy for him to collect some. He couldn't let the souls in the world of reincarnation steal the soul fluid. Although the outside world was still evolving and he didn't know how many worlds it would evolve, this world was stable. It was equivalent to taking root. Ning Shu wasn't afraid anymore. He also went to take a look at his precious skeletons. In the arena, there were skeletons fighting. There were cheers and shouts in the surroundings. There were more than 2,000 people. When they fought, there was a huge commotion. There were no souls in the surroundings. Ning Shu just looked from afar. Some skeletons already had a faint golden color on their bodies. Some skeletons were still white. The gap was slowly widening. Other than individual battles, there were also some group battles where they cooperated. Zhu Jun looked up and saw Ning Shu above the clouds. He jumped up and jumped very high. He exchanged glances with Ning Shu and then fell back down. When he fell, he bent his knees slightly and jumped up again. Ning Shu, there were springs under his feet. He could jump so high. Ning Shu landed on the ground and asked Zhu Jun, "How's the situation now?" "It's okay, but there are no more merit grains," Zhu Jun said. Ning Shu looked at him indifferently. "You didn't embezzle them, right?" Zhu Jun shook his head seriously. "No, those merit grains are managed by the 4 selected people. There is no embezzlement. If the number is wrong, it will be discovered at the first moment." It was good that there was supervision. He was afraid that Zhu Jun would monopolize it. There must be someone to check and balance it. "Bring the other 3 people over. Let me take a look." Although he might not remember who was who, it was necessary to meet them. Maybe they were the future leaders. All right. Zhu Jun ran off at a very fast speed, disappearing from sight. After a while, 3 skeletons came over. Zhu Jun said, "This is the master of this world, our Pai. Boss." "Hello, boss." The 3 skeletons saluted differently. One saluted with a military salute, one put his hand on his chest and bowed, a knight salute, and one cupped his hands. Although she had no memory, the greeting was imprinted in her bones. Fortunately, no skeleton reached out to shake her hand. Chapter 3077. Do you all have names? Tell me your names. Although they were all skeletons, he could just call them by their names if he couldn't recognize them. Ing Yu. Yan Chuan. Wen Ji. Ning Shu chewed on the 3 names and memorized them. Then, he took out some merit points, record these merit points in a book. Also, just fighting is useless. You must develop morality, intelligence, physique, beauty, and labor. Some skeletons are just smart, but their physical fitness is not good enough. Zhu Jun shook his head. They are all skeletons. As long as they have the support of merit grains, they won't be too weak. On the contrary, those who are not smart will become weaker. Ning Shu nodded. That's the reason. However, there are some skeletons with special characteristics. Pay attention to them. For now, the team will be temporarily handed over to the 4 of you. The four of you won't be able to manage such a big team. Spread out and promote those who can be promoted. This way, it will be easier to manage. Ning Shu said. The four skeletons nodded stiffly. Got it. Pay more attention to the Lake of Rebirth. The Lake of Rebirth will give birth to an evil beast. Zhu Jun should know what it is, so you must monitor it at all times. That's all for now. Pay more attention. Ning Shu thought for a while and didn't have much to say. Ning Shu let the four skeletons go back. He went to the Lake of Rebirth to take a look at the Book of Life and Death. He didn't know if the Book of Life and Death recorded the life and death of this world. With this thing, it would be much easier to check a person's past life. If it evolved again, it would record the life and death of more creatures. Things born from the Tao of Heaven are all good things. Zhu Jun didn't go back with the other three skeletons. He followed behind Ning Shu step by step. Ning Shu asked, "What's the matter? Crispy Pippy, when will you go to the world of living again?" Zhu Jun asked expectantly. Crispy Pippy, your sister. Your whole family is crispy. Ning Shu said elegantly, not for now. Don't keep thinking about the outside world. Oh, Zhu Jun replied. When are you going? Can you bring me along? If you work hard, I will bring you on a trip. If you don't work hard, then forget it. Zhu Jun said, don't worry, I will definitely do my job well. If you want to go to the world of living beings, remember to bring me along. Ning Shu grunted, and Zhu Jun immediately skipped away. It wasn't the delicate skipping of a little girl. Instead, he jumped very far away. After landing, he jumped up again and jumped even further. Li Si kept flipping through the Book of Life and Death. Ning Shu asked, did you find it? Li Si shook his head. No. Now, the words on the Book of Life and Death are gone. There's nothing left. Li Si handed his Book of Life and Death to Ning Shu. Ning Shu flipped through the Book of Life and Death, and as expected, it was filled with blank sheets of paper. The living beings that were recorded in the past were all gone. Ning Shu said, it's a good thing that they disappeared. How can they record the creatures of this world if they don't disappear? Li Si probably wanted to laugh, but the skeleton couldn't laugh. In order to express its joy, it squeezed out a few chuckles from its throat. What an unpleasant laugh. Ning Shu squatted beside the pool of rebirth and watched the souls jump in one by one. There was no ceiling, and they disappeared. Flowers bloomed and wilted. Life was just like that. Reincarnation was really bitter. Who knew what she would become next time? So, her current state was the best. Ning Shu was still feeling sad beside the pool of rebirth when the system shouted, Master, there's a message. It was probably about picking up trash again. It could always accurately find the time when she was resting. Ning Shu stood up with the umbrella and returned to the system space. He took a look and saw that it was indeed the system urging him to pick up the fragments. Ning Shu picked up the sign and hung it around his neck. Since he was going to pick up trash, it would be good to earn some money. There were so many wild men waiting to be raised. Ning Shu asked the system to send him a location. He wanted to try building a spatial tunnel himself. Ning Shu wasn't sure how strong his spiritual power was, but he wanted to test it out. Maybe he could build a spatial tunnel. The system gave him the location of a spatial node. Ning Shu coughed and swayed left and right to warm up. He let out a long breath and began to build the spatial tunnel. His spiritual power surged out like a tide and quickly built the tunnel. It was as if many invisible bricks were flying over to form the tunnel. The consumption of spiritual power was too great. Ning Shu was stunned, but the construction of the spatial tunnel continued. Finally, it connected to the spatial node. Ning Shu couldn't believe it was real. Did it really succeed? Ning Shu was a little afraid that it wasn't solid enough. He had to crawl through the spatial tunnel that he built himself. Ning Shu walked into the spatial tunnel. The tunnel was a little shaky. Ning Shu stepped lightly. When there was no movement, he put his feet back down. It was as if he was afraid of stepping on a landmine. Fortunately, he finally reached the location. As soon as he came out of the spatial tunnel, Ning Shu wanted to shout, "Everybody, I finally succeeded in building the spatial tunnel. This has something to do with everyone's support, but more importantly, it's my own efforts." Ning Shu turned the sign in front of him over and showed the side with the words, "Picking up fragments, 100,000 yuan each time." As soon as Ning Shu appeared, business came to him. It was so popular. Ha 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 ha. The wild men at home had food to eat. Fuck, I'm responsible for making money to support the family, but even skeletons aren't as beautiful as flowers. Ning Shu, come here. Ning Shu waved. I have something to tell you. Ning Shu smiled at these customers and said, "The judge is looking for me." Wait a minute, wait a minute. Ning Shu squeezed out of the crowd, worried that the granduncle was here to cut off his source of income. Ning Shu asked with a smile, "Why are you looking for me?" "You handle the star stones," said the granduncle. Ning Shu was stunned. "Why? Why what?" The granduncle raised his eyebrows. "Isn't it good to master one more skill?" Ning Shu shook his head. "I don't know how to. I can't make money from handling the star stones. Fragrant Wind Man looks irritable every time he handles the star stones. This shouldn't be a good job." Ning Shu said, "There are so many people. How can you find me? They all have their own worlds to maintain and deal with more things." The granduncle pulled a chair out of nowhere and sat down. Ning Shu was speechless. "That's why I seem to be the most idle here. I can even make money. Since you can pick up fragments, you have to learn how to handle the star stones." Ning Shu was very touched and wanted to break his legs. "Actually, I really don't know how to handle this. Besides, I have things to deal with. Besides, I'm already very tired from picking up 1,000,000 pieces. I can't handle the star stones," Ning Shu said. The granduncle sharpened his nails with a file, put it to his mouth and blew. He said lightly, "You can handle it. I can't handle it." Based on the current situation, Ning Shu felt that the granduncle wanted to shift the responsibility to someone who could handle the star stones and then climb up on his own. Besides, there were so many people who could handle the star stones. Why did he look for her? They are all very busy. And he has a huge team to manage, and uncle has to deal with the problem. The granduncle's glasses were a little reflective, and his eyes couldn't be seen clearly. Wasn't she afraid of embezzling the star stones? Chapter 3078. Ning Shu was very surprised that she was suddenly asked to deal with the star stones. Senior uncle had always been the one to deal with it. Occasionally, Fragrant Wind would do it, but it was all done through gritted teeth. Ning Shu asked, "Aren't you doing well?" Senior uncle sat in a chair. "I have something to do. What's the use of learning more?" Ning Shu said, "You guys can do it. I can shout 666 from the side." Senior uncle said, "Why don't you learn something else instead of picking up the pieces? Uncle has too many things to deal with. Not only do you have to make items, but you also have to make the system space that matches the mission taker and the system. And he patrols the plane, so you have the most free time." Ning Shu was speechless. "What do you mean by the most free time? I don't know how busy I am. I have to worry about how to make money every day. There are so many people to feed. Do you think she's free to pick up the pieces to make money?" Ning Shu chuckled in his heart. Ning Shu said tactfully, "I may not be able to do it. What's the benefit?" Senior uncle put down the nail clipper and file and said to Ning Shu, "Go easy." "What the hell? Go easy?" Senior uncle stretched out his hand, and Ning Shu realized that he was going to wash his hands. Ning Shu got some water expressionlessly. Senior uncle washed his fingers carefully, wiped the water on his hands with a white handkerchief, and then slowly put on white gloves. Don't you have me to teach you? You're not a pig. You should be able to learn it, senior uncle said. Ning Shu shouted silently. I'm a pig. Senior uncle stood up and took off the tag on Ning Shu's neck. Let's start. You're not as direct as selling your body. This was simple and clear. What's selling my body? Ning Shu asked, what do I need to do? Since it was already like this, he might as well learn. Ning Shu asked again, how many merit points do I get every time? No matter how great loyalty was, it couldn't compare to poverty. I love the organization deeply, but I can't live without money. 100,000, Ning Shu frowned. So little. Every time, there would be a huge pile of star stones that needed to be dealt with. He had to remove the star stones from the fragments. There were a lot of star rocks, and they were connected to more than one side. Processing the star rocks included purifying the star rocks. Fragments could not be mixed in. They had to be processed piece by piece. Then, he had to turn the solid stellar stone into a liquid state, and he had to place the liquid stellar stone on the plane wall. Then, he would let the planes stick together. He still had to see how well they stuck together. If he let go too early and didn't stick them together properly, he would have to redo it. If he dragged it out too long, it would be a waste of time. The next place was waiting to be dealt with. Such a complicated process. It was only 100,000 yuan. Ning Shu wondered why it was so cheap since it was a technical move. The Grand Elder said indifferently, one place is 100,000, and the next place is 100,000. Understand? Ning Shu replied, oh, I understand. Grand Elder, let's start. Learn it as fast as possible. Ning Shu was speechless. These two props are used to process and scrape the star rocks. Put away the processed star rocks and then process them together. Ning Shu squatted down and picked up a smaller fragment to scrape the surface of the star rock. However, a force directly numbed her arm. She used a lot of strength, but it bounced back. Ning Shu shook her arm. No. Since you can connect the planes, you can't hold the planes without some strength. Since there are rules, use the power of the rules, the Grand Elder said indifferently as he watched from the side. Ning Shu cursed in her heart. Could it be that she, a newbie, had to deal with so many star rocks? Ning Shu had no choice. She had the power of the rules, but she was still very unfamiliar with the process. She felt that her arm was no longer her own. She really wanted to leave. It was so easy to pick up the fragments. The Grand Elder pulled a chair and sat beside her. He had no intention of helping at all. The big shots who had picked up the fragments were waiting. There was also the army that was dragging the plane that had lost control. Everyone stared at Ning Shu. Oh my God, so many people are looking at me. I'm so nervous. Ning Shu felt that her arm was shaking. It was bounced back by the power of the star rock. Even if she used the power of the rules, it was still bounced back. It hurt. Especially when she saw the mountain of star rocks that needed to be processed, it really made her feel desperate. Ning Shu said euphemistically, everyone is waiting. The Grand Elder looked at her, his eyes white. What does it have to do with you? You have the time to worry about others, but you don't have to worry about yourself. Ning Shu was speechless. I mean, the two of us can do it faster. Does she have to worry about others? Ning Shu began to process the star rocks dispiritedly. As she processed, she asked, are there any tricks? Jingqing's body was so big. She guessed that the Grand Elder's body wouldn't be small either. He must be very strong. She was just an ordinary soul. How could she have such strength? Wait until your body adapts, the Grand Elder said coldly. Ning Shu was speechless. Damn it. It wasn't easy for her to pick up fragments, but now she had to learn it again. Ning Shu was still struggling. I think I can shine more if I pick up fragments. There's no distinction between high and low jobs. I'm willing to give my whole life to pick up fragments without any regrets. The Grand Elder said, hurry up and deal with it. Use the strength of talking to deal with these things. Ning Shu was speechless. Don't you understand? Even if you did, you pretended not to understand. Ning Shu sniffed and continued to process. Now, not only were her arms shaking, but her entire soul was in pain from the rebound. Oh, fuck. This was really a tough job. No wonder Fragrant Wind looked so bitter. These big shots were all waiting. Some impatient ones didn't want to wait. They walked over and asked the Grand Elder, when are we going to the next place? It was boring to waste time on such useless things. The Grand Elder said, it's urgent. Help me deal with it. The big shot choked. Looking at the mountain-like star stones, he said, forget it. I'll wait. I can afford to waste some time. I'm just worried that there will be many planes to deal with later. The Grand Elder said, I'm not in a hurry. Why are you in a hurry? Big shot, of course I'm in a hurry. Can't you help a little? There are so many. When will the little girl finish? The big shot could only go back and continue to wait. The Grand Elder sat in a chair with his eyes slightly closed, as if he was taking a nap. He crossed his legs and didn't move at all. Ning Shu wanted to cry from dealing with the star stones. How long would it take to get so many? If this went on, those eyes would pierce her into a sieve. Well, on the path of beginners, if you rush and don't deal with it well, you have to do it again, and everyone will collapse. Moreover, there might be new planes that would collapse and produce even more fragments. Ning Shu slowly worked. The rebound force was getting stronger and stronger, as if it was going to bounce her soul away. Ning Shu used a lot of strength to stabilize her soul, /BK. Chapter 3079. However, it was very painful. She had to use a lot of strength to deal with it while enduring the pain. Fuck, what kind of work was this? It was like torture. Fortunately, every time she was about to run out of strength and her soul was in pain from the shock, there was a warm current flowing out of the law of life that flowed through her soul, making her soul feel better. Ning Shu was busy processing the star rocks. Some of the big shots were really bored, so they gathered together and chatted or sat cross-legged to cultivate. The scene was really boring. Ning Shu was sweating profusely. She was so busy that she was dying. In the same world, different people. Ning Shu felt sour. If she picked up fragments, she could probably make money now instead of dealing with a mountain of stellar stones. Just dealing with them was the first step. There were still the second and third steps. Ning Shu wiped her face. Probably because she was obsessed with the stellar stones, Ning Shu really couldn't bear to waste a single bit when dealing with them. She scraped off every bit. Thinking back to how much money she had spent to get this thing. And recently, she had spent so many merit points to buy stellar stones and build a pool. She didn't know if she could get a bit. Apart from picking up a few scraps, could she get a few pieces? Ning Shu thought bitterly. Dealing with one area was worth 100,000 merit points. Then dealing with 10 damaged areas of the plane was worth 1 million merit points. Thinking about it, it was quite worth it. Ning Shu's grand-uncle asked, can my 1 million fragments and tax punishment be cancelled? If she didn't talk about conditions when she could, she would be crazy. The grand-uncle opened his eyes. These are two different things. Don't mix them up. With that, he closed his eyes again. Ning Shu pursed her lips. If she picked up fragments in the future, it would still be at least 1 million. And there hadn't been any tax for hundreds of years. If there were 3 lost cities supporting her, she wouldn't be in such a poor state now. Ning Shu was in despair. So much, Ning Shu was like an ant, moving a mountain bit by bit. When she encountered a bigger fragment, she had to crawl and scrape off the stellar stones bit by bit. Working high up in the sky was so dangerous. Ning Shu didn't know how much time had passed, but he felt the gaze on him change from urgency to helplessness, then to despair, and finally to stupefaction. In any case, he had no expectations for himself, especially for the army. They had to delay the plane for so long. They were probably in despair. Ning Shu was also in despair. Even if he wanted to teach someone, this wasn't the right way to do it. By the time all the star rocks were collected, Ning Shu could no longer find himself. His mind was in a mess. Who am I? Where am I? Where am I going? Even his soul had become much dimmer. After processing the last star stone, Grand Elder opened his eyes and said, "Now, melt the star stone." Ning Shu sat down and waved his hand. "Let me rest for a while. I can't take it anymore. This is treating people like animals." Tai Shu ignored Ning Shu's rejection and said, "When you melt the star stones, use your rule power and make sure every star stone is melted." Ning Shu was speechless. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Tai Shu picked up a star stone. The star stone slowly melted in his hand, forming a viscous liquid state. "I understand. Try it yourself." Tai Shu's hand tilted and the star stone liquid in his hand fell on the surface of the star stone. Gradually, the liquid began to solidify. Ning Shu picked up a small piece of star stone and put it in his palm. He looked at the star stone. It didn't move at all. Ning Shu said, "I've tried my best. It can't be saved." He was too tired. After processing so many star stones, he still had to melt them into star stones. Tai Shu sat in a chair and leaned back. "You can deal with it when you can." Ning Shu was very upset. This meant that he had to deal with it. Ning Shu concentrated on melting the star stone and used the rule power. The water droplet between his eyebrows was faintly hot and then cooled down. This cycle repeated. Ning Shu suspected that his head was going to be damaged. But fortunately, the star stone showed signs of melting. "It's melting." Ning Shu looked at the star stone melting in his hand. It was like mercury, a viscous liquid. "You have to melt all the star stones in an instant," Tai Shu said to Ning Shu. Ning Shu sighed. She didn't know what to do. It was very difficult to melt a star stone. How could she melt a mountain of star stones in an instant? As long as it wasn't a pig, it probably wasn't a pig. How could there be a pig smarter than her? What should she do? Ning Shu glanced at Tai Shu. He didn't speak. He just sat in a chair and looked at her. He wasn't a qualified guide. Since he brought her here to do manual labor, he didn't teach her. Ning Shu's hand followed the surface of the star stone and mobilized the rule power. There was a milky white source of life at her fingertips. She gathered her mental strength and began to melt the star stone. Soon, the star stone that came into contact with her hand began to melt first and then radiated out. More and more star stones began to melt, but the energy in Ning Shu's body began to withdraw. Not only the rule power, but also the rule power. The rule of earth on her wrist, the rule of wood between her thumb and forefinger, and the water droplet between her eyebrows were all burning hot. Ning Shu really wanted to withdraw her hand, but half of it had already melted. If she withdrew her hand, all her efforts would be in vain. She had to persist. When all the star stones had melted, Tai Shu said, "Put it in place and face the wall. Use your mental strength as fast as possible." Ning Shu used her mental strength to arrange her mental strength and directly buckled the star stones in the liquid state onto the plane. Not only that, but she also had to spread them evenly on the plain wall. Of course, she also had to use her mental strength, and it had to be evenly distributed. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to smear it on the small places. Ning Shu couldn't grasp the quantity at all. She didn't know if she had enough star stones. If she had more, she wouldn't be afraid. She was afraid that it wouldn't be enough. That would be despair. Seeing that Ning Shu was done, the army dragged the free plane and slammed it against the plain wall that was smeared with star stones. They used the strong adhesive force of the liquid state to stick the plane together. Tai Shu pointed to the place where the plain wall was joined. When the star stones begin to crystallize, it's almost done. But when the outer part begins to crystallize, it doesn't mean that the inner part will also crystallize. You have to wait until the outer part is completely crystallized before you check the situation inside. The heat of the plane collision will slow down the crystallization of the star stones. Use your mental strength to check. Ning Shu released his mental strength, but it was very difficult to penetrate the star stones. The star stones were natural adhesives. It wasn't that easy for mental strength to penetrate them. The outer part had all crystallized, but the inner part hadn't. Tai Shu didn't say that it was done. The army didn't dare to let go. If they did, it would be equivalent to working for nothing. The price was too high. After waiting for a long time, Tai Shu said, "It's done." The army slowly let go. The plane didn't shake, which meant that they had succeeded, /BK. Chapter 3080. Ning Shu heaved a sigh of relief and patted her shoulder. "I'm going back, I'm too tired." Doing 10 missions was tiring, but fighting was even more tiring. Grand Uncle said, "Keep doing it, someone will take over when the time comes." Ning Shu, huh? It wasn't over yet. Several of her law imprints were already throwing a tantrum. If she forced herself to do it, her imprints would be destroyed in the end. If she didn't cherish herself, who would cherish her? So Ning Shu said directly, "I have no energy left, and I can't do it anymore. Even if I lose my life, I can't do it." With her current strength, she still couldn't handle the star stones for a long time. This wasn't like picking up fragments and controlling the law of wood. This was all about her hand-to-hand combat. She couldn't save any trouble. Grand Uncle frowned. He probably didn't expect Ning Shu to be so useless and waste so much of his time. He waved his hand and let her go. Ning Shu didn't hesitate and directly built a space channel to return to the system space. She couldn't take it anymore. When she built the space channel and returned to the system space, Ning Shu was already paralyzed. "I'm too tired, I'll go. I'd better pick up the fragments first." Dealing with the star stones was still beyond her ability. Ning Shu was very clear in her heart. And the strength of her soul wasn't good enough. The law imprint was boiling hot. Ning Shu went to the city of wood and let the law of wood absorb the energy. She also went to the restaurant to eat. Her hand holding the chopsticks was shaking. She felt that the power of the star stone still remained in her soul and hadn't dissipated. "Don't tremble. It's like epilepsy." Ning Shu ate with trembling hands. Sure enough, the star stones weren't something that ordinary people could handle. It was better to leave it to those big shots. It was especially tiring. Maybe when she was strong enough, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with the star stones. Her world of reincarnation had evolved into a world. It was probably the star stone that had glued several worlds together. When the law of wood was no longer boiling hot, Ning Shu paid the bill. When she left the restaurant, she strengthened the enchantment of the city. Next, she went to the city of water and the city of earth to absorb the power of law and strengthen the enchantment. However, where could he absorb the law of life? There were law cities, but there were no law cities. The space between his eyebrows was boiling hot, making Ning Shu feel as if his forehead had been splashed with sulfuric acid. This was a symptom of overuse. Ning Shu went to look for the Cheongsam man, but he was told that the Cheongsam man wasn't around. He wanted to go Taobao with him, but since the Cheongsam man wasn't around, Ning Shu went to look for Elder Qi alone. Elder Qian was still setting up his stall at the same place. He stroked his beard and asked Ning Shu with a smile, "Do you want to go to the Void World? The Void World is full of treasures." Ning Shu was speechless. Everyone was familiar with each other, so there was no need to brag like this. What world of treasures? Liar. Ning Shu asked, "Are there any popular treasures recently?" There were too many types of treasures, and Ning Shu couldn't recognize all of them. Generally, he would ask about the more popular items. Generally, popular items meant that they were items that the mission enforcers needed. Elder Qian said, "Spirit Stone." Ning Shu thought, "Don't mention these things to me." Elder Qian took out a scroll and said, "Look at this. There are spirit stone mines in this world." He took out another scroll. This world might have secondary fire orbs or heavy fire orbs, which can be used to purify spirit energy. Ning Shu sighed. These were all leftovers. She still had so many spirit stones and 8 fire orbs in her system space. Her spirit energy hadn't taken shape yet, so she couldn't use spirit stones or fire orbs. Ning Shu asked, "Is there anything else? I don't need these things. For example, the world tree, or something with a strong assimilation ability, or something with abundant life force." Now, the space between her eyebrows was burning. The after effects were showing. Elder Qian flipped through the scroll. "Wait, let me look for it. Not many people want things with life force." Since she was in a spirit state, life force wasn't seen by others. "I found it. This is something from a long time ago. I don't know if the Void World still exists. Do you want to buy it?" Elder Ning Shu asked. Ning Shu said, "You don't even know if the Void World still exists. You dare to sell it to me?" Elder Qian said, "I'm only in charge of selling it, not after sales. If there are any problems, you'll have to take care of it yourself. Then can I see if the Void World still exists?" She just needed to use the spatial tunnel in the scroll to test it. Elder Qian shook his head. "That won't do. This is a one-time use item. If you use it and don't buy it, I'll lose out." Ning Shu was speechless. "Then I'll pass." She didn't have much money now. If she bought an empty shell and the Void World disappeared, it would be a waste of money. Ning Shu sat beside Elder Qian. Elder Qian looked at her from the corner of his eyes. "What are you doing? Are you buying it or not?" "I'll sit for a while." Ning Shu asked Elder Qian, "Aren't you doing missions now?" Elder Qian stroked his beard. "Now that I've changed my profession, I'm not doing missions anymore. I'm starting my own business." Ning Shu asked, "Then when will I be able to leave the mission state?" "I don't know about that. I'm old and don't want to do it anymore. I've separated myself from the system. There's no future in following an old man like me. I'll let the system follow other young people." "Oh, someone like Shu Bai." Once the system separated, it would erase its memory and reformat it. Actually, the system was a little bitter. There was a reason why the organization arranged for 2 people. One person's skills were weak, while the other 2 were strong. There was always room for discussion. However, it didn't rule out the possibility of one of them becoming a puppet or the system becoming a background character. Sometimes, the system couldn't control the actions of the mission enforcers and would even be implicated. Ning Shu felt that her relationship with Xing Qing could be described as that of a puppet. As for Elder Qian saying that he was old, Ning Shu didn't believe him. They were both in spirit form, so there was no way to talk about age. It was just that he gave up halfway and chose another way of life. Under normal circumstances, mission enforcers wouldn't be allowed to leave the mission state. Only by doing missions can one have a future. People like us are useless other than paying taxes to the organization, Elder Qian said casually. The organization needs people who are strong. Ning Shu replied, "Oh. You're the embodiment of the space rule. Isn't that strong enough? Tisk, there's always someone stronger. You haven't stepped out of this place yet. How would you know how big the world outside is?" Elder Qian shook his head. Elder Qian was probably bored waiting for business and had someone to chat with. The two of them sat in a dragon's gate for a while. In the end, Ning Shu ended the conversation reluctantly. She wanted to understand other rules. The prophecy rule, the witchcraft rule, and all sorts of other rules were waiting for her to understand. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with learning more. However, dealing with the star stones was beyond her ability for now. /BK Chapter 3081 Elder Qian, you're not buying anything. After talking for so long, was their friendship fake? Ning Shu shook his head. I don't need anything for now. I'll come again next time. Elder Qian, get lost. Ning Shu arrived at Prophecy City. This city was really gaudy. There were all kinds of mirages everywhere. It was dazzling. Furthermore, everyone saw different things. Ning Shu didn't understand the prophecy law at all. As for whether what he saw was real or just a mirage, Ning Shu didn't believe it at all. He treated it as a fart to affect his state of mind. Prophecies were things that he wanted to see. It had nothing to do with the future and was just his own imagination. Ning Shu wandered around the city and found a suitable place to sit down. All kinds of images flashed in front of him. Ning Shu closed his eyes, but these things appeared directly in his mind. You're really all-pervasive. I'll be damned if I believe you. Ning Shu was like an old monk in meditation. After a long time, he seemed to wake up from a nap. I didn't understand anything. Ning Shu didn't understand what had happened. Could it be that he had blocked these things? Prophecies were actually precise calculations. They calculated the possible future situations. In other words, anything could happen in the future. So these things had to be accepted. Whether her soul was destroyed, she was strong, she was bullied, or she died on the battlefield, these things had to be accepted. Alright, Ning Shu didn't even blink. He looked at the images one by one. His fingers moved slightly. His mind was calculating rapidly. What were the chances of him appearing in the images? In the end, his mind was numb. He finally came to a conclusion. These were all possible outcomes. She would either die or become strong. If I ask you, do you think I don't know? Ning Shu rolled his eyes. He didn't know who the prophecy law incarnate was. Could she make a prophecy for him? He felt that prophecies were probably things that couldn't be made by people who were stronger than him. The weaker the living being, the easier it was to make a prophecy. The stronger the prophecy, the more likely it would backfire. Speaking of which, this law was actually a little useless. It was not bad to be a quack. Being able to see through someone's life with a single glance was indeed quite godly. However, life is full of all kinds of changes. A river forks and flows in different directions. In any case, it was not a burden to have more skills. If he could comprehend them, he would not force himself to do so. It was not like the law of space, where he had to learn it. Now that Ning Shu could construct a spatial tunnel that was relatively far away, he still wanted to comprehend the laws of time. Space and time were two high-level laws, so comprehending these two was not wrong. He decided not to comprehend the witchcraft law for the time being. After exchanging for the faith bell, he would be immune to many curses. Moreover, there was an annoying person there. When he saw dog shit, of course he had to avoid it. He couldn't just step on it. Once he was able to process a large amount of star stones and increase his value, he would deal with that person. Ning Shu's schedule was packed. Although he was comprehending the laws of prophecy, his mind was filled with thoughts. Of course, the consequence of this was that the law of prophecy was even less compatible with him. Ning Shu immediately adjusted his mentality. No matter what kind of law it was useful. There were no useless laws, only useless mission enforcers. Ning Shu took a deep breath and then began to comprehend the laws of prophecy wholeheartedly. All kinds of messy information exploded in front of him. Frame by frame, all kinds of sounds mixed together. There were sounds of tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, human voices, animal voices, and all kinds of sounds that could directly penetrate the soul. Ning Shu felt unwell all over. The sounds and images were especially annoying. Ning Shu wanted to give up, but at least he had persisted until now. What could be more terrifying than now? His sister had seen the world, so she was not afraid of this little thing. Moreover, the images were getting worse and worse. Ning Shu suddenly felt that he was sitting on the edge of a cliff. Below was a dark abyss, and he could not see anything. His sudden appearance caused people to feel nervous. Ning Shu steadied herself. She was a soul, so she could fly. Suddenly, a meteorite appeared in front of her at high speed, heading straight for her face. Ning Shu could not help but want to tilt his head to avoid the meteorite, but his thoughts were fake. The meteorite hit his face, and an invisible barrier shattered the meteorite. It exploded in front of Ning Shu with a loud bang. If he had a physical body, Ning Shu suspected that he would have been turned into atoms by the sound waves. He would be annihilated in an instant and cease to exist. Fuck, he was quite scared. Ning Shu floated in the sea. The waves came one after another. Even if Ning Shu was the embodiment of the law of water, he could not use the law of water in this situation. He flopped in the sea. They watched in despair as wave after wave crashed against them. Ning Shu steadied his mind. Fuck, comprehending the law was like reading an adventure. It shook his mind. It challenged the fear in his heart. Ning Shu could still deal with these natural challenges. He felt the power of nature. These were not strong powers to him. However, the void was destroyed by the Grand Elder's spear and turned into darkness. This was what Ning Shu was afraid of. He was eaten by the monster and became a part of the nutrients for the insect monster's evolution. He disappeared completely. This time, it was fear. Or he was crushed to death by the giant. Those tall and strong giants. Ning Shu would only feel fear when her life was threatened, and her life was threatened. Ning Shu did not know how long this image would last, but it was very taxing on his mind. Once his mind was not firm, his heart would be occupied by fear. He did not know if he could wake up. He also did not know what kind of harm it would cause him if he forced himself to wake up. It was hard to get off now. Ning Shu decided to persevere. Even if he was afraid of these things, they were real and might happen. This might be something that he knew about the future. So what if it was a prophecy? He might not be lucky to know his fate. Ning Shu was angry. Let's see what else you can do to scare me. The image changed. Ning Shu saw many giants that were as big as Jingqing fighting with each other. A giant fell to the ground with a thud. Countless worlds in his body were exploding. The giant's body was fragmented. At that moment, countless creatures and worlds were wailing. She was like an ant. She hugged her head and fled between these giants. She was afraid that a giant would smash her to death. Ning Shu was speechless. This image really scared him. Ning Shu was stunned. He did not even know how to react. /BK Chapter 3084. No, I'm ignorant. Hey, don't just talk. Continue to deal with the star stones. How can you be so irresponsible? Who didn't know how to accuse others? Ning Shu said cheekily. The entire organization was haggling over every detail. They couldn't wait to split the merit points into two halves. How could he still have the face to say that he wasn't petty? Senior uncle stared at Ning Shu. Ning Shu touched his heart. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm scared. I didn't do anything wrong. You can't erase me. Senior uncle sighed in the end. Don't argue with an idiot. Only an idiot would argue with an idiot. Ning Shu snorted twice and released even more vines. The vines covered the sky, and some people came over to let Ning Shu pick up the broken pieces. Ning Shu accepted the order with a smile. He received 100,000 merit points and gave 100,000 fragments to the big boss. The big boss took the fragments and left. Ning Shu asked senior uncle, "Is my rule power too weak? Is that why I'm so tired?" Senior uncle, "Yes." Ning Shu nodded. Then she should strengthen the power of the rule of life. How to strengthen it might have something to do with her perception. Senior uncle finished dealing with the star stones. He looked very relaxed, completely different from her tired appearance. Ning Shu asked, "Every time you deal with it, does the organization give you money?" Senior uncle, "The organization is mine. Do I need the organization to give me money?" Oh my, this is incredible. The grand uncle grinned. With his foggy glasses, he looked very cold. He said in an indifferent tone, "I'm too direct. The organization should belong to everyone. Let's build a harmonious and prosperous organization together." Ning Shu laughed. It wasn't funny at all. Ning Shu didn't want to discuss the ownership of the organization. "Are there any extra star stones this time? Can I take a few?" Senior uncle, "No." Ning Shu wasn't disappointed. He put away the vines and prepared to pick up some leftover materials. This time, when he was trying to get the star stones, he was too nervous and didn't pick up the leftovers. The Grand Elder melted the star stone very quickly. It melted in the blink of an eye and was soon on the bit wall. His series of actions were very smooth. Even a painter is so generous. All of you are generous, okay? After the planes were glued together, they rushed to the next place. This time, the world of samsara was broken. The void of the world of samsara was grey. Let me come this time. I feel that I should be able to handle the star rocks in the world of reincarnation. She treated it as practice in advance. She had the world of reincarnation, so it should be easier for her to handle. The Grand Elder sneered, "Do you think this is a game? If you want to do it, then do it. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it." Ning Shu exclaimed, "I realize that you people are really speechless. When I don't want to do it, you say I'm useless. When I want to do it, you say I'm just a game. So, what do you want me to do? I'll send you to your death. Good or bad, it's all up to you. I can only accept your judgment." The Grand Elder narrowed his eyes and looked at Ning Shu. "You seem to have a lot of grievances. What right do you have to question me? Grievances don't exist. I'm just not used to you guys changing your state at any time," Ning Shu said. The Grand Elder said, "I'm like this. Whether you're used to it or not, it has nothing to do with me. Your grievances have nothing to do with me." Ning Shu spread his hands. "I don't intend to get used to you. What kind of person you are has nothing to do with me. Then I won't deal with it." The Grand Elder said, "If you deal with it now and don't handle it properly, you'll have to pay with your life. What you're dealing with is not a toy. You shouldn't have the attitude of trying. You should know the consequences." Ning Shu was speechless. In close contact, he realized that this person was even worse than he imagined. As he said, "If you have the ability, kill him." "I don't have the ability now. I'll bear with it." Ning Shu took the tool in his hand and began to process the grey star stones. The star stones in the life plane were bright, but the star stones in the world of reincarnation were gray and had no luster. Ning Shu used the tool to scrape the star stones. The power of the star stones was indeed strong. Ning Shu's hand was numb from the recoil. The Grand Elder pulled a chair and sat next to him, closing his eyes to rest. The big shots who were picking up the fragments and the army holding the plane were all in despair. This little girl was dealing with it again. How long would she have to wait? His Excellency walked over in the air with a child. He had just collected the souls of the broken plane and planned to come over to talk to the Grand Elder. Seeing that Ning Shu was busy processing the star stones, she took the child and turned to leave. When Ning Shu swung his arm, he found His Excellency and immediately waved. "Here, here." The Grand Elder opened his eyes and saw His Excellency. He saw him holding a child and looking at the child. His Excellency had no choice but to come over with the child. He also pulled a chair and sat down. He said to the Grand Elder, "There's no way to continue like this. The plane is getting more and more damaged. Because the Sea of Laws has dried up, it can no longer provide energy for the plane. The plane has lost its ability to heal itself. The human immune system had lost its function. A little virus and bacteria could infect a person and end their life." Ning Shu listened to the conversation between the two with his sharp ears while looking at the 7 or 8-year-old child. This child was crystal clear. He had grape-like eyes and white and tender skin. He was very cute. Looking at his clothes, he should be a boy. His Excellency was teaching him to be a man. The boy smiled at Ning Shu, revealing his white teeth. But his teeth turned into sharp teeth. They were shiny and wanted to bite people. Ning Shu narrowed his eyes and looked at him. In the end, the child couldn't withstand Ning Shu's gaze and looked away. "If you want to eat me, you have to be prepared to vomit and have diarrhea." Ning Shu focused on processing the spirit stones. The topic of discussion between the Grand Elder and His Excellency wasn't something she could solve or worry about, so she didn't care. Ning Shu shook his hand and calmed down to process the star stones. His processing speed was a little faster. During this time, His Excellency stuffed a black pearl into the child's mouth. In such a pearl, there was the soul of a reincarnation world. It was stuffed into the child's mouth as a snack. If he didn't eat it, these souls would have nowhere to go. Now, this child's appetite had become so big. He could eat the soul of a world in one bite. How terrifying. His own world wasn't enough for him to eat. The child smacked his lips as if he was still savoring the taste. He shook his head in dissatisfaction. The Grand Elder held his forehead and listened to His Excellency's words. His Excellency only said one sentence, "Do as you see fit." His tone was a little helpless. "What you're doing now is all deceiving yourself and others. The Sea of Laws no longer provides energy. Even if the planes are glued together, there won't be any energy transmitted through the star stones. So, what difference does it make whether these planes are glued together or not?" /BK Chapter 3085. Grand Uncle, it's already old and decayed. It's been around for too long. We've lived for too long. If you can't bear to part with Qingqing, you have to make a final decision. To be swallowed by them or to cut off my own path of survival and leave my dignity behind. I'll listen to you. His Excellency shook his head and left with the child. The Grand Elder took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. His nose was pinched red. Without the cover of his glasses, the Grand Elder's eyes were dark and gloomy, suffocating and ominous. Seeing Ning Shu staring at him, he said, "I'll deal with you." Ning Shu didn't say anything and just scraped the star stone. Perhaps she was used to the rebound power of the star stone. Ning Shu felt that it was a little faster to deal with the star stone. Could it be that she was really used to the power of the star stone? After picking up all the fragments, Ning Shu was still dealing with the star stone. Everyone was staring at her. Some people sincerely suggested, "Little girl, you're more talented at picking up fragments. Don't deal with the star stone. Maybe they wouldn't have to pick up the fragments in the future. She could deal with it alone. This job was mandatory. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come." Ning Shu just smiled and didn't say anything. She had a world to live in. How could she ask someone like the grand uncle to deal with it? She had to rely on herself. Ning Shu dealt with the star stone alone. It wasn't that these big shots didn't know how to deal with the star stone, but they didn't want to be tired. She didn't want to be tired either. She wasn't stupid. She didn't know how these big shots dealt with problems in their worlds. Ning Shu scraped the last fragment clean and said to the grand uncle, "It's done." The grand uncle put on his glasses. "Continue." Ning Shu began to melt the star stone. The grand uncle said, "There aren't enough star stones this time. Can't you see?" Ning Shu thought, no wonder it was done so early. After a while, the army brought over a lot of star stones. They poured them out bag by bag. "If you don't have any, try going to the plain to look for them. These star stones should have been lost there," the Grand Elder said calmly. His tone was light, and he wasn't even strict or evil. But this made him even more nervous. Ning Shu swallowed nervously. He still had to go to the plain to search. How much time would that waste? Ning Shu began to melt the star stone. After melting, he smeared it on the bit wall as fast as he could. At this time, it was a test of one's mental strength. If one's mental strength was proficient, it would be easy to do things. Ning Shu felt that he should go back and practice his spiritual power. If he picked up his hair, his spiritual power would become more skillful. The collision between the two planes produced a muffled sound, but with the viscous star stones acting as a buffer, the collision between the two planes was not a big deal. Now, he was waiting for the star stone to solidify. Ning Shu observed the solidification of the star stone. She had completed the bonding of the planes by herself. She should be able to do it alone in the future. 100,000 at a time, and 10 times a million at a time. This was enough for Skeleton to last for a while. He couldn't grasp the amount of star stones. He didn't know if it was more or less. There wasn't a specific amount. It all depended on the situation of the planes breaking away. If there were more planes breaking away, more star stones would be needed. Ning Shu was proud of this success. He thanked everyone for their support. Of course, this was his effort. The Grand Elder said, "You go and pick up the fragments." Ning Shu agreed and followed him to the next place where the plane was broken. His Excellency said that it didn't make much difference whether these planes were glued together or not. But if these planes were left to wander and the fragments were not dealt with, these intact planes would also suffer. The Grand Elder called the eldest uncle and Fragrant Wind over and disappeared in a flash. Ning Shu guessed that he must have gone to find Jingqing. With so many planes, looking for one person was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. Fragrant Wind was in a military uniform. Looking at the mountainous star stones, he sighed. His expression didn't look good. Ning Shu felt that his expression should be the same as Fragrant Wind's when he dealt with the star stones. Suddenly, he felt that picking up the fragments was so easy. It was like playing. Fragrant Wind said to Ning Shu, "Come and help me deal with it." Ning Shu tilted his head and looked at Fragrant Wind. He asked seriously, "Everyone can deal with it. Why do you want me to help?" Fragrant Wind said directly, "You're new. Who will do it if not you?" Ning Shu had a look of understanding on her face. She then asked, "If I refuse, will it be because I don't know what's good for me and then it will be my fault?" Fragrant Wind nodded. "Of course it's your fault. It turns out that I'm easy to bully. I don't know what's good for me if I don't follow others' wishes. Like the company, interns were cheap labor. If you were asked to do it, it would be your honor. If you refused, it would be ungrateful and ungrateful. The organization recruited you and asked you to do things. You didn't know what's good for you and even talked about conditions. God, you should shine and work hard without complaint. You should have no desires and die for the organization. Ning Shu asked, if I help, will you give me some of the reward? Fragrant Wind said, I'm asking you to help. I'm not the one paying. Ning Shu said, oh, I refuse. The job that pays me is to pick up fragments. I can't not do what I'm supposed to do and help you. Uncle Chang chuckled. Fragrant Wind glanced at him. What are you laughing at? What's so funny? Why are you bullying the little girl? The little girl was originally trembling in fear. If you bully her like this, she'll find trouble with you when she comes back to her senses. Let me tell you, don't mess with women, Uncle Chang said as he dealt with the star stones. TSK, you're used to pretending to be a good person. It's fine to trick an ignorant girl, Fragrant Wind said with disdain. Uncle Chang wasn't angry. He took out the star stones. Because I'm a good person. A good person will live a peaceful life. Fragrant Wind was probably so disgusted by Uncle Chang that he couldn't speak. Ning Shu sat at the side and controlled the vines. He felt that it was boring watching the two of them hurt each other. He suddenly thought of something and asked Uncle Chang, I heard that you created a space for mission enforcers and the system to coexist. Then, did you also create the space for me in Jingqing? Seems like it. Jingqing is too noisy, so it needs to be reinforced, Uncle Chang said. Ning Shu blinked. So you guys know me? Uncle Chang smiled and said, yes, I know you. I was still thinking about when I should change Jingqing's space. Light and cruel. Ning Shu didn't feel anything when he heard this. Maybe Jingqing was angry with these people, but he was also tired of living in such a delicate situation. Otherwise, he would have died in his ignorance. Ning Shu cursed in his heart. He almost lost his life. If he came just a little bit earlier, he would have died. /BK Chapter 3086. Uncle still looked like a good old man. He was gentle and had a smile on his face. From his body, he did not seem to have the arrogance of the other big shots. It was as though he was a polite man. Ning Shu suddenly laughed and said, if there is a problem with the Sea of Laws, everyone will die in the future, although we cannot be born in the same year, month and day, but we can die in the same year and month. And he glanced at her, you even know about the Sea of Laws. Ning Shu nodded, I have been scolded by all of you, I have been despised by all of you, if I do not know any news, or my own situation, I should really die. Because of Jingqing, she was forced into a circle that did not belong to her, she was kicked around like a ball, and the people around her laughed at her. She directly despised him, and the people around her laughed, she was called here and left at will, she said some conditions, it was her fault. Ning Shu thought about it now, her expression at that time was filled with fear, but she did not know it. She handed over what she had with both hands, traded with others, and talked about conditions, it seemed to be her fault as well. She had paid double the price, and these people were trading with her while looking down on her, saying that she did not know what was good for her, that she was stingy, that she was not magnanimous. If anyone were to talk to her about magnanimous, she would definitely spit at them, I spat on your face, and you actually did not forgive me, how can you be so magnanimous? A few million merit points to buy a star rock, but in reality, a star rock was 20,000 merit points, of course, that was the wholesale price, if not, it would not reach a few million merit points. In truth, it was her own stupidity to be cheated, she had to find others to trade with. At that time, the nihility laws were about to leak out, and being cheated was something that could not be blamed. Ning Shu thought about it now, but there was not a single ripple in her heart. Who did not take a detour, being mocked for being stupid was also a thing of the past. Sometimes, living was not an easy thing, especially if one wanted to live a carefree life, it was even more difficult. Say no. Fuck, you don't know what is good for you. Ning Shu looked at He, I hate you the most. And he said indifferently, I don't need you to like me. Ning Shu nodded, that's right, if the Law C really collapses, will you die? And Chang Bo smiled and shook his head. It's not like that. You will die, but some people won't. We have methods to preserve our lives. The collapse of the algorithmic C is nothing more than one less place for us to live. Ning Shu chuckled. You speak as if you can find a new place to live. If they could find a place to live, then Abyssal Prefect wouldn't have said those words to the Grand Uncle. Ha ha ha, when faced with the threat of death, Ning Shu's heart suddenly relaxed. Let's go hand in hand and die together. Whoever doesn't die is a bastard. Ning Shu was no longer afraid. What was there to be afraid of? When the time came, everyone would die together. It was the end of the world. When I'm not even afraid of death, there's nothing to be afraid of. Until now, only the fear of death could threaten her. Seeing the two of them handling the star rocks while she leisurely controlled the vines to pick up the fragments, she felt inexplicably happy. Little girl, 100,000 fragments. A person walked over and said to Ning Shu. All right, keep the fragments well. Ning Shu received 100,000 contribution points and gave her 5 bags of fragments. She was now selling fragments. Uncle Chang was handling the star rocks. Seeing Ning Shu's carefree look, the fear in his body suddenly disappeared. He said, you seem to have some misunderstanding about the Law C. Even if you die, it will still be there. A few 100,000 years is nothing to us, and the Law C still has a few 100,000 years. The premise is that you can live until we die together. Ning Shu only said, don't worry, don't worry. I will try my best to live until then. Don't worry. Uncle Chang's face was good. What am I worried about? You're worried that I won't be able to see the Law C collapsing. Don't worry, I will definitely try my best to live until then. If I don't see that kind of destruction in this life, the beauty of tragedy, then I would have lived in vain. Ning Shu said with a smile. Ning Shu felt that his current state of mind was like a carnival before the end of the world. Although it was very far away from the end of the world, Ning Shu's mind was very calm, without any fear. Uncle Chang, it's good to think that way. Grand Uncle said that you can handle the star rocks independently. You will take over later. Uncle Chang said. Ning Shu shook his head. Although I can handle it independently, I don't want to. I want to pick up the fragments. After I'm done, I want to do the mission. Although these worlds are going to be finished, we still have to look at the present. Everyone will die eventually. Do what you need to do. Everyone knew that they were going to die, but no one would do nothing just because they were going to die. Instead of being fearful of eternal life that had no end and fearful of dying in the next second, knowing that they were going to die eventually made them feel more relaxed. When it was time to die, then die. Do what you need to do and work hard. No one knew what you would achieve, but no one could make her die before the Law C collapsed. And he frowned and wanted to say something, but Ning Shu interrupted him. Don't spit out evil words to me. I don't like to hear these words at all. Uncle Chang laughed. Knowing that the Law C is going to collapse, you let yourself go. Do you want the Law C to collapse? Ning Shu snorted. Don't put such a big hat on me. What do you mean I want the Law C to collapse? The Law C has problems to begin with. These problems were not caused by me. Knowing that my mission has an end, I'm very happy. This has nothing to do with hope. Ning Shu calculated. By the time the Law C collapsed, she would have lived long enough. Many hundreds of thousands of years. Uncle Chang, all right, all right. You're right. Do you want to take over? Ning Shu shook his head. He stood up and patted the non-existent dust off himself. Sorry, I'm a very stingy person. I'm not changing. Furthermore, the main system did not arrange for me. The main system arranged for me. I will do what I need to do. Not everyone was ordering her to do this and that. It was as if anyone could order her around. Sorry, I won't do it now. You can just kill me. Not only am I stingy, but I also don't know what's good for me. He would even complain that she did not do well. She had already reached the number of 1 million and earned a sum of money. She could go back. The people here were all big shots. Once they were done, she would be a joke if she stayed here. Ning Shu used the spatial node provided by the system space to construct a spatial passage and left. Furthermore, he did not even look back. Uncle Chang wiped his sweat. The power of the star rock was especially strong. This was the most annoying, /BK. Chapter 3087. Uncle Chang said to He, don't mess with girls. Women are petty and hold grudges. You've messed with her. On the phone. And he rolled his eyes. Obviously, she doesn't like you. She can handle the star stones on her own, which means that the power of the law is not weak. She'll probably take turns with Grand Uncle. If she doesn't come, the two of us will replace Grand Uncle. I don't have the patience to deal with this. Uncle Chang handled the star stones. The power of the star stones was especially harmful to the soul. The inside of the plane was regulated by the heavenly axiom, which made the plane endlessly grow. The outside was protected by the star stones. They could also protect the plane. The star stones were difficult to handle because they could attack and were also protected by the law. If an ordinary soul handled the star stones, it might be directly annihilated. Therefore, the star stones would consume the soul. Not only would it consume the soul, but it would also cause damage to the body. This damage was very small, but it could cause a lot of damage over time. Some methods were needed to heal it. It's not fun at all. I prefer to make props and space systems. Looking at the mission enforcers and the system in a small space system is so warm and cute. Uncle Chang sighed. And he frowned. As a straight man, it was a bit difficult for him to adapt. Can you not be so disgusting? You people don't understand warmth. And he turned his back to Uncle Chang and handled the star stones. Ning Shu returned to the system space and absorbed some soul power. When he handled the star stones, his soul became dim again. No wonder no one handled the star stones. Not only was it tiring, but it also affected the soul. She was stingy, but the organization was also stingy. The soul power he had stored up earlier was almost gone. Soul power was something that could not be bought. Even if he worked himself to death, he would only earn 100,000 contribution points for each trip of star stones. She didn't want to do things that others didn't want to do. She didn't know what was good for her. She deserved to be bullied. Ning Shu thought that if he hadn't been chosen as a mission enforcer, he would have been reincarnated many times. He would have been a human, an animal, an insect, and then slowly dissipated. After the idea of immortality faded a little, Ning Shu felt that reincarnation was not something difficult to accept. If it was a human, they would suffer for the rest of their lives. If it was an animal, they would be ignorant for the rest of their lives. In the end, they would be slaughtered or hunted down by their natural enemies. There was also a possibility that they would become an insect that lived and died at night. Their souls would be so weak that they would disappear. There would be a day when it would disappear. It was only a matter of time. When the sea of law collapsed, she would also dissipate. There was no difference, the only difference was how long she lived. Immortality, which was too ethereal, made her tremble with fear. Knowing that he was going to die, his feet felt steady instead. It was as if immortality was a great gift from the organization. Now, this gift seemed as weak as paper. Once it was broken, the relationship between the mission enforcers and the organization would be nothing more than a relationship between enslaved and enslaved. However, some people took this slavery as a great gift. How could you not know what's good for you? They didn't even give him an equal and mutually beneficial relationship. They were clearly using each other, but they twisted it into a gift. Ning Shu had heard too many people saying that they didn't know what was good for them. The price of immortality was to cut off all escape routes. Ordinary souls could start anew, but mission enforcers couldn't. It was probably because the organization was afraid that mission enforcers would be distracted and think too much, so they cut off all escape routes. There was only one path for you to walk, and everyone had to cross a single plank bridge. They were given a chance to be strong, but this strength was also earned by oneself. Could it be that when the organization helped people become strong and gave them the power of the soul, they still had to carry the burden and move forward? It was clearly a matter of mutual benefit, but Ning Shu was annoyed by people looking at her as if she was ungrateful and didn't know what was good for her. Did she not do what she should do? Was it because she wasn't kind and benevolent, and took on everything herself, like a selfless person bearing all the responsibilities? Her relationship with the skeleton was just a relationship of using. She made the skeleton to protect the world of reincarnation, and the skeleton used her strength to obtain resources from her. It was a matter of mutual benefit, and not a matter of bestowment. Ning Shu let out a long breath, and the anger that had been suppressed in her heart for a long time was let out. Every time she faced other people's disdainful eyes, she retorted because she didn't know what was good for her. Well, she would be even more ungrateful and petty in the future. What can you do to me when I'm like this? I don't want to, but I will do what I should do. Ning Shu let out a breath. Even if she died in the future, she wouldn't die so easily. What was there to be afraid of? She was clearly in a soul state, but Ning Shu didn't know why she had so much exhalation. It was probably because she had been holding in her anger in the past. Ning Shu patted her chest and said quietly, I won't be bullied in the future. I'm going to die anyway, so it doesn't matter. Immortality is just a water-moon mirror flower. Since she was given immortality, why did so many mission enforcers die, get erased, or die in the mission, and die in various ways? It was said to be immortality, but it was actually a lifetime. Ordinary souls could reincarnate many times. She had been on the brink of death many times. She should have understood earlier that immortality was a false proposition. She didn't blame the organization, but her own brain wasn't clear enough. She held on to an illusory thing as a treasure. She had clearly encountered too many deaths, but her brain was stupid. She deserved to be laughed at because she was really stupid. She was so stupid that she ignored something that truly existed, and treated a joke like a pursuit. This pursuit itself was wrong, and it made her life so suffocating. This was probably because she knew she was going to die. Like what her uncle said, she let go of herself. Death was no longer something she was afraid of. She had nothing to fear now. If she still held in her anger before death, she would have lived her life in vain. Ning Shu let out her last breath and smiled. The water droplet mark between her eyebrows was hot, and there was the sound of water flowing by. The mark emitted specks of light, and it was so hot that Ning Shu felt like her brain was going to melt. The world above her head began to grow. Tree trunks, branches, and fingernail-sized leaves grew. It moved from the top of her head to Ning Shu's palm. Ning Shu looked at the world tree in his palm and touched it with his other hand. It was real. There was an inexplicable power as soon as he touched it. It had exuberant vitality and a dark aura of death. Ning Shu smiled bitterly. What immortality? Only life and death were real. The organization drew a big pie, and it was an illusory pie. The organization didn't even take it seriously. When someone was erased or died, everyone thought it was natural. No one thought about the immortality the organization had bestowed. Since it was immortality, why would one die/BK? Chapter 3088. To think that he had the world of samsara, he could even ignore death. How blind must he be? Ning Shu now realized that his previous thinking was very contradictory. He took immortality for granted, but he was careful not to let himself die. Ning Shu touched the world tree. He worked hard to accumulate and increase his energy. He did not want to be erased. This was his suspicion and distrust of immortality. On one hand, he had the gift of immortality. On the other hand, he was afraid of being erased. The mark between his eyebrows was sometimes cold and sometimes hot. Ning Shu felt like he was going to catch a cold. Ning Shu put away the world tree. He was really relieved. Fortunately, the potted world tree did not grow on his head. Knowing that it was not suitable for him to stay in his head, the world tree also moved. The world tree hid in the soul. Ning Shu picked up the mirror and looked at the situation on his forehead. The mark was surrounded by a little fluorescent light. It made the mark deeper, more three-dimensional, and more mysterious. It was sometimes cold and sometimes hot. It was uncomfortable. One moment the soul was about to melt, and the next moment it could freeze the soul. He did not know when it ended. Ning Shu lay on the sofa without moving. He closed his eyes and rested. It was dark in front of him, but suddenly there was a light. One dark and one bright alternated with each other, mixed with a ding-dong sound. Ning Shu fell asleep, and it was forced. After becoming a soul, Ning Shu had never been so sleepy. He obediently closed his eyes and slept. Anyway, it was in the system space. There was no danger. When he woke up, Ning Shu felt so comfortable. He had never felt so comfortable before. It was as if there was a stone pressing on his heart. Now the stone was removed. It was too easy. Ning Shu stretched. He looked at his clothes and saw that they had changed again. It was a black dress with a long skirt and a tube top. It was tightly attached to his body. Ning Shu touched his chest. It used to be flat. Although it was not big now, there was a curve. The size was just right. Ning Shu picked up the mirror and looked. His face used to be pale. Now he had peach blossom eye makeup and eyeliner. This permanent makeup was not bad. The mark between his eyebrows had a small fluorescent halo around it, as if it was reflecting the light. Ning Shu sighed. Why are you so beautiful? He didn't know what kind of law had modified her soul. It was probably the law of life or the law of water. He felt that the law of water would not have such a sharp and dark wind. It was most likely the law of life. Life has a beginning and an end. There is life and death. The cycle goes back and forth. This was probably the dark side of death of the law of life. Ning Shu touched her face and felt that the makeup suited her current state of mind. Joy surged in her heart. Perhaps it was because of the law of prophecy. Ning Shu knew that there was a change in her world of reincarnation. Ning Shu raised the umbrella and smiled at the mirror. At that moment, Ning Shu was stunned by himself. She could be so beautiful. This beauty was a symbol of strength. It was the law's modification of her soul. The law was creating a better and better version of her. Ning Shu walked into the world of reincarnation. He didn't go to the first world of reincarnation. Instead, he went to the second world of reincarnation. This world of reincarnation was very big. It had already grown to the size of the first world of reincarnation. A black sandy ground was slowly becoming moist. Then, it slowly accumulated into puddles. The puddles converged into a pool. The pool transformed into various beautiful scenes. Fragrant flowers grew around the pool. These flowers brought the scent of happiness to people. In the future, this pool would grow bigger and bigger. Ning Shu smiled. Another world of reincarnation had been born. Perhaps not long after, souls would be brought into this world to undergo reincarnation. However, the first world of reincarnation was enough for the souls of Nine Palace Mountain. This world didn't seem to be connected to the world of living beings. If I'm empty, I'll be happy. I have a house. If I don't live in it, I'll be happy too. Ning Shu stood beside the moist sand and smiled. His entire body was relaxed. There was nothing more important than his own happiness. Ning Shu entered the world of Nine Palace Mountain and collected some power of faith. There was power of faith in the third world. It was provided by those uncivilized people. When he entered this world, he heard all sorts of chants that he couldn't understand. He collected many threads of power of faith. The power of faith in the fourth layer was provided by those women who were saved. These women lived in secluded valleys and cultivated peerless martial arts. Occasionally, they would come out to save women who were in desperate situations. If there were abandoned baby girls, they would bring them back to raise them. This would probably form a country of women. The last time Ning Shu came, there weren't so many people. This village was very big. There were many people living here. They were all women. There were both old and young. However, all of them tidied themselves up well. Even if they didn't have any jewelry on their heads, they would put a flower in their hair. It was flourishing. This was because these women all cultivated peerless martial arts. No matter what they did, they had strength. Sometimes, they couldn't do things and needed men to solve them. Moreover, they had fighting strength. Occasionally, they would come out to teach men a lesson. Gradually, they became famous. Of course, some of the women who had lived in the valleys since young had never seen the outside world, so they treated it well. Even if the elders said that men weren't good, it couldn't stop these young ladies from treating men well. Of course, there were also women who fell in love with each other. Being a lesbian was also love. Some young ladies snuck out to face the temptations of the world and the temptations of men. Ning Shu stood in the clouds and looked down at the village. He didn't appear. Instead, he collected many threads of power of faith. The fate of these people wasn't Ning Shu's responsibility. If she saved them, she would be responsible. Should she be responsible? Perhaps that was why she wasn't likable. She was irresponsible. Perhaps it was because she had to pay the medical fees and take care of them until they were discharged. Only then would she be responsible. She had already given them a place to stay. If she didn't cherish it and attracted people who she shouldn't have, it was up to her. Anyone with a brain would understand that this was their foothold. Moreover, the people in power outside the valley were searching for these women. After all, it was a mysterious organization and they were all women. If a man didn't treat a woman well, these women would suddenly descend from the sky and beat him up. Who knew if it was because of the existence of these people, but the women became more confident. Even if the men wanted to hit the women, they would hesitate before doing so. When they abandoned their wives and children, no matter what status they had, they might be found by those mysterious women. /BK Chapter 3089. This was probably the earliest women's federation organization. Therefore, as long as one was strong, one would not be bullied. If one fell behind, one would be beaten. If one did not work hard and shout for oneself, would others help you? Ning Shu put away these threads of faith power. These faith power were the key to destroying the disaster beasts. Ning Shu was patrolling the Nine Palace Mountain world, looking for any treasures along the way. In the void, Tai Shu scanned the plain again and again, looking for Jingqing. Suddenly, he stopped and entered the plain in front of him. Enter the capital and kill the fatuous ruler. Kill the fatuous ruler. Kill the fatuous ruler. Clean up the ruler's subordinates. Clean up the ruler's subordinates. Outside the city walls, there were shouts. They were like roaring tigers, shaking the city walls and causing dust to fall. Outside the city walls, groups of people in ragged clothes held weapons. These weapons were either hatchets, sickles, or wooden sticks. Attack the city. We have food. We have food. Our wives and children have food to eat. Attack the city, attack the city. Attack the city. Attack the city. The shouts were not in sync, but these old, young, and even young people's faces were filled with desire and even fanaticism. They waved the weapons in their hands. This was a war caused by hunger. The war happened because they were too hungry and forced to a dead end. Taishu stood in the air and looked at these people. An old man with a hunched back raised a sickle and shouted at the top of his lungs. His old face was full of vicissitudes. He seemed to feel something. He looked up and saw Taishu, but as if he did not see anything, he shouted as well. His voice was haggard and hoarse. Taishu walked towards him. Taishu's appearance made many people look at him. The shouting became sparse as they stared at the man in strange clothes who suddenly appeared. Who was this person? Taishu's hands were wearing white gloves. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the old man and grabbed his neck, not giving the old man a chance to speak. How dare you? What are you doing? Who is this person? It's the enemy. He's killing our soldiers. These people raised their hoes and sickles to slash at Taishu, but they were blocked by an invisible barrier. Some people murmured, "Immortal. Immortal." The Grand Elder threw the old man's body away, but his hand was still clutching the neck of a young man. Everyone was at a loss. They looked at the old man's body, and then at the two of them. The Grand Elder grabbed Jingqing's neck and flashed into the void. Jingqing didn't look too good. I was in the old man's body and used the decaying aura to hide my existence. How did you find me? Grand Uncle, it's not about how you hide. It's about whether I want to find you or not. Jingqing sneered, his expression fierce. Why? Why? The Grand Elder said calmly and indifferently, because I'm grabbing your neck now, and you're not grabbing mine. When you can grab my neck, I won't ask why. Jingqing was grabbed by the Grand Elder and brought to a void. There was a huge body in this void. Jingqing looked at his body and revealed a smile that wasn't a smile. He said strangely, "Aren't you the most hypocritical person who values life?" Why? The world and my body will also be annihilated by the law of nothingness. Why don't you feel bad? The Grand Elder ignored Jingqing's sarcasm. It doesn't matter. Just wait for the new sea of law to be born. Don't you see all life as ants? Why do you care about those planes? Grand Elder, can you not fucking disgust me? Creating a new sea of law isn't just because you want to live. Use me to exchange for your life. Jingqing was like a dog that had been forced into a dead end. He bared his teeth and wanted to tear everything apart. The Grand Elder was still indifferent. If you grab me now, you can also use my life to exchange for yours. Hee, it's just a winner takes all. Jingqing smiled at the Grand Elder. I'd rather self-destruct and find a way to live. I won't be immersed in the law of nothingness anymore. Grand Elder, don't bully people too much. Over and over again. What do you take me for? Can you peel off that hypocritical and disgusting face of yours? Jingqing roared. Why should I, your father, give up my life for those ants? Who do they think they are? Who do you think you are? The planes are all destroyed. Those ants have a place to live. This place is gone. It should die with them. So what if the sea of law is destroyed? I'll live as long as I can. So what if I'm destroyed with the sea of law? Can these ants bear to let me die to help others? They died in the blink of an eye. What qualifications do they have to make me sacrifice? I have no love or responsibility for them. Grand Elder, what's the point of living for so long? Your life has meaning. It's not about being yourself, and there's no joy. Can you not fucking be moved by yourself? Do you think you're so great? You created a toy-like organization. You're too bored. Now you want to extend your life to continue this boredom. You're sick. The Grand Elder's expression didn't change. That's it. Fuse with your body. Zheng Qing was furious. What if I don't? What if I choose to die? Then I'll watch you die. Since you don't want to, then it's fine to die like this. Zheng Qing laughed. Grand Elder, you're so disgusting. The Grand Elder nodded. I'm quite disgusted. I let you soak in the law of nothingness not only because I'm bored, but also because the sea of law is about to collapse. Even if you can't form the sea of law, at least you'll die before me. I'll feel at ease. Zheng Qing, fuck, I know you've always disliked me. Either you die now or you fuse with your body. Zheng Qing, what if I don't choose either? The body behind Zheng Qing began to explode. I choose to destroy my body. Zheng Qing laughed. His laughter was quite carefree. It was as if doing this would make the other party's plan fail. He could see the other party pounding his chest and stamping his feet. The Grand Elder didn't stop him. He just watched Zheng Qing's body collapse indifferently and said, from now on, your body no longer needs the nourishment and power of the Sea of Law. This is also a good thing. It's a good thing for the Sea of Law. Thank you. I seem to be able to live for a few million more years. The Grand Elder actually laughed. The white lenses covered his eyes. Zheng Qing paused. Fuck. He immediately stopped collapsing his body. No matter what he did, the Grand Elder would take advantage of him. Fuck you. Zheng Qing, I choose to die with you. The Grand Elder grabbed Zheng Qing's neck and directly pressed Zheng Qing's soul into the huge body. Zheng Qing struggled and refused to fuse with the body. However, he was pressed down by the Grand Elder, and his soul fused with the body, /BK. Chapter 3090. Zheng Qing's soul hid in the huge body. Soon, he opened his eyes and stood up, looking down at the Grand Uncle. The Grand Uncle stood in front of the huge body like a black ant. He wasn't even an ant. At most, he was just a black dot. His voice was deafening. It feels so good to have a body. Zheng Qing raised his foot and stepped on the Grand Uncle. Without a body, I can't use many methods. I have to thank you for giving me a body. It's easy to run. Zheng Qing's body had been guarded by the Grand Uncle. Zheng Qing couldn't use his own body. The Grand Uncle pulled out his gun and used it to block the huge foot. Zheng Qing couldn't step on it anymore. No matter how much strength he used, he couldn't kill the Grand Uncle. What did you do to my body? You sealed my body. Zheng Qing roared. The sound waves shattered the fragments and dust in the void. No wonder the Grand Uncle pressed him into his body. He wasn't afraid of him having a body at all. The Grand Elder exerted his strength and directly pushed away the huge foot above his head. Zheng Qing was staggered by this force and almost fell down. Zheng Qing stabilized his body and checked himself. His power was controlled. There was a huge seal that controlled the world in his body. He couldn't draw power or mobilize the power in his body. Zheng Qing shrank his body to the same size as the Grand Uncle. He grabbed the Grand Uncle's collar. You're really so heartless. I didn't guard against you at all last time and you put me in the law of nothingness. Now you're doing it again. Even if I die, I won't let you get what you want. The Grand Uncle said, then you can die. Why should I die? Zheng Qing spat at the Grand Uncle. You're really disgusting. Do you think I can't do anything just because you sealed my power? The Grand Uncle looked at him indifferently. He watched him fight like a trapped beast. He was sharp, roaring, questioning, and desperate. Jingqing turned and ran, but his body was frozen. He couldn't even lift his feet. A huge force was suppressing his body. He was frozen. Even his clothes couldn't move. Jingqing sneered and muttered something. An inexplicable force poured into his body from all directions. These strands of power were like threads that entered Jingqing's body. Just as Ning Shu was about to complete a quest and exchange for fasting pills from the exchange store, he suddenly felt something tearing at his soul. Ning Shu's soul power was rapidly draining away. Startled, he hastily set up a magic array to prevent his soul power from being sucked away. What's going on? Although there was a formation covering Ning Shu, his soul power was still being extracted. The world tree took root tightly, grabbing the spreading soul power. The imprint between his eyebrows stabilized Ning Shu's soul, while the law of earth imprint suppressed his soul. With the cooperation of several parties, Ning Shu's soul only slowed down its disappearance, but it was still disappearing. At the same time, all the mermaids that were flying in the sea had their souls sucked out in an instant. They lost their vitality and floated in the sea, motionless. The beautiful mermaids were instantly wiped out. Not a single one was left. The soldiers who were besieging the city suddenly died in front of their opponents. Large groups of soldiers fell down. In an instant, both sides were wiped out. No one was left alive. Large-scale deaths occurred in many planes. Anyone who came into contact with Jingqing had their souls sucked away one by one. Their souls turned into threads, passed through the plane wall, headed toward the void, and merged with Jingqing. They became the power of Jingqing. Ning Shu was still struggling to hold on, checking her body over and over again. This scene was too familiar. In the past, almost all of her soul power had been sucked away by Jingqing. Jingqing was extracting her soul power again. He must have done something to her body to be able to extract her soul power from a place far, far away. She thought it had nothing to do with Jingqing. The battle between the Taishu and Jingqing had nothing to do with her. But now it seemed that it wasn't over yet. What exactly was it? Ning Shu checked her soul over and over again, but she couldn't find anything. Was it because she was too weak? Her soul power was still dissipating. Even with the help of the laws and the world tree of laws, the other side was still slightly better in this tug-of-war. Her soul was getting weaker and weaker. Ning Shu sneered. She followed the suction and jumped in the direction of the suction. Jingqing, who had absorbed a lot of souls, could move his body now. With his soul power as his power, he gained freedom and used his soul power to break the seal in his body. The Taishu looked indifferently at Jingqing, who was fighting like a cornered beast. He wasn't in a hurry to make a move. Only by wearing down Jingqing's will and pushing him into despair again and again could the law of nothingness successfully merge with Jingqing. Jingqing was wary of the Taishu while breaking the seal in his body. But this seal couldn't be broken in a short time. Suddenly, a sharp blade pierced through Jingqing's heart. The Taishu narrowed his eyes. Jingqing lowered his head and looked at the sharp blade. He looked back at the person who had pierced his body and sized her up. After a while, he seemed to remember. "It's you. I almost couldn't recognize you. You've become different." Jingqing didn't seem to feel the pain of the sharp blade piercing his body. Instead, he sneered and broke the blade with his hand. "This kind of thing can hurt me." Jingqing sneered. The Taishu just watched. He didn't say anything or stop the fight between the two. Ning Shu also sneered. "I don't know if it's useful or not. After all, things like soul poison don't seem to have any effect on an existence like you." She had taken the risk of contaminating her own soul by smearing soul poison on the blade. When Ning Shu looked at people, his black eyeliner slightly raised, giving people a feeling of fierce disdain. Jingqing suddenly laughed. Little puppies can bite people. This kind of soul poison is just like a mosquito bite to me. It's useless. Because they were close, Ning Shu's soul power drifted towards him. Ning Shu stretched out a vine and tied Jingqing up. Jingqing sneered. What harm can these methods do to me? Your appearance here is quite unexpected. I thought you would think of a way to save your life and not come here to fight with your life. What made you go all out all of a sudden? Jingqing looked at Ning Shu seriously. He seemed to be really curious about this question and looked like he was seriously asking for an answer. Ning Shu condensed a blade in his hand. He flicked his hair and smiled. It was fierce and beautiful. I'll die sooner or later. I've said it before. I won't let myself be wronged again. Even if I have to die, I'll dig out a piece of flesh from your body. Life is just one death. Death is eternal. Chapter 3091. If you want my life, I'll have to fight with my life on the line. Ning Shu raised her head and grabbed her collarbone. She pulled out a red mark that connected to her soul. Her collarbone caved in. Jingqing smiled. His clothes fluttered and his fine black hair fluttered, shaking away the vines that wrapped around his body. This strength passed through the vines and into Ning Shu's body. The woodlaw's imprint between her thumb and forefinger made a cracking sound as cracks appeared on it. Why don't you take a look at your own strength and bark in front of me? Jingqing said as he attacked the seal on his body. For Jingqing, it was just a toy that appeared to relieve boredom midway. This toy could also distract the Grand Elder. The more chaotic the situation was, the better. If he got close, he wouldn't have to spend a lot of energy to extract her soul. Little puppy, you have a lot of resentment towards me. Jingqing looked at her. His facial features were gentle, unlike the Grand Elder's fierce and cold appearance. He was very delicate. He was like a naughty child who was teasing a dog or watching an ant bare its fangs and brandish its claws. He had a kind of high and mighty disdain. It's not resentment. I thought some things could be over. Even if you took away my soul power, I'll admit to what I did before. But now, you still want my life. Ning Shu said indifferently. She didn't have any resentment or anger towards Jingqing. The only thing left was to fight with her life. If she could live, then she would live. If she couldn't, then she would turn herself into a sharp blade and pierce Jingqing's body. At least, she would make him feel pain for a while. The law of prophecy in her hand was boiling hot. It seemed to feel something and wanted to escape from Ning Shu's hand. When it found that it couldn't, it sank deep into Ning Shu's palm. Ning Shu stroked the small spoon. This should be the law imprint that she had spent the shortest time with. Comprehending these things was to become stronger. If she didn't use it now, when would she use it? Wasn't using her life to protect these things putting the cart before the horse? Ning Shu raised his hand. The red whistle spun rapidly in Ning Shu's palm. Ning Shu said in a low voice, his words rippling through the void. With 3/4 of my soul power, I foresee that you will fall into the law of nothingness and will never be able to rise again. I curse you to suffer the pain of being devoured and assimilated by the law of nothingness every day. Although it was called a prophecy, it was more like a curse. A prophecy could predict what would happen in the future. Instead, it used the power of prophecy to make the prophecy come true. The spoon spun faster and faster. In the end, it exploded with a bang and turned into specks of starlight. They converged into a beam of light and shot towards Jingqing. Jingqing calmly looked at the beam of light shooting towards him. With a wave of his sleeve, the beam of light dissipated, turning into specks of light and disappearing. Don't use these childish methods on me. Because he had lost 3/4 of his soul power, Ning Shu's soul power was now very weak, and it was still being absorbed by Jingqing. She smiled slightly. Her somewhat transparent face was full of smiles. Whether it works or not, you'll only know after you try it. Also, are you sure it doesn't work? Even if the power of prophecy didn't enter your body, those specks of light still landed on your body. Perhaps this power wasn't very strong. In fact, to Jingqing, it was like a speck of dust that would disappear with a pat. However, as long as the time was right, it might be the last straw that broke Jingqing's back. Although she might not be able to see it. Jingqing tilted his head and looked at him. His delicate face was full of confusion. What happened to you? That dog that only knew how to hide in a corner and whimper. No matter what happened, it would silently endure it. At most, it would bark twice and become obedient after being kicked by others. Now, it bared its sharp teeth, bringing with it a sense of sharpness. It was about to bite someone. Ning Shu said, "A cornered dog will jump over a wall. A cornered rabbit will bite." As Ning Shu spoke, he removed the law of earth imprint from his wrist. Jingqing suddenly laughed as if she had seen the funniest joke in the world. Although you have a bit of a temper, you're still as naive and ignorant. These methods of yours, what power of laws? Don't forget where I was born. Jingqing pointed at the motionless granduncle. There are no laws in our bodies. Our bodies are the laws themselves. You actually used this kind of power to deal with me. Jingqing looked relaxed on the surface, but he secretly sped up breaking the seal. Only granduncle was his opponent here. Granduncle was watching from the side. He knew too well what granduncle wanted to do. He just wanted to humiliate him over and over again. Midway, such an amusing existence appeared. Interesting, interesting. Ning Shu said, "Oh, thank you for reminding me." Ning Shu put the law of earth imprint back on his wrist and asked, "Since the power of laws can't deal with you, what kind of power can? Can laws do it?" Jingqing narrowed his eyes. "Are you that dependent on me? You want to kill me, but you still have to ask me questions." Ning Shu's soul was already very transparent. She still had a smile on her face. "You know that I don't have much soul power left. Before I die, I have to see you in pain. It won't be a waste of the power I worked so hard to obtain." When it came to death, there was no fear in her tone. There was only calmness. Jingqing felt that she was really different. "No one can kill me," Jingqing said. Ning Shu looked at granduncle and asked, "Not even the judge?" Ning Shu, like a lady from an ancient family, bowed elegantly to granduncle. "Please deal with Jingqing. Since Jingqing is the key to forming the sea of laws, it doesn't matter if he's alive or dead. Forming the sea of laws requires his body. It has nothing to do with whether he's alive or not. If he's dead, just throw his body into the law of nothingness. It can also form the sea of laws. If he's alive, his will of existence will slow down the assimilation of the law of nothingness." Ning Shu actually didn't understand why Jingqing should be soaked in the law of nothingness alive. It would be the same if he was dead, unless granduncle didn't kill him. Being swallowed and assimilated by the law of nothingness was very painful. His body and mind had to endure this pain. In the end, his consciousness dissipated and became a part of the law of nothingness. Jingqing would no longer exist in this world. Ning Shu said, "As long as you kill him, I'm willing to pay any price, even if it's my life." Jingqing's pupils constricted. He looked at Ning Shu. "He's my brother. No matter how bad our relationship is, it's not up to an outsider like you to ask him to kill someone. Even if granduncle wants to kill me, it's him who wants to kill me. It's not up to you to speak." Ning Shu nodded. "That's right. Whether he wants to kill you or for other reasons, as long as he kills you, it's what I want to see." It was just to tell granduncle that killing Jingqing was the best choice. S. Chapter 3092. Ning Shu now understood what the abyssal prefect meant when he said he was reluctant. Clearly, it was best for Jing Qing's body to be soaked in the law of nothingness. Even if she died, she would not run around. However, the grand uncle wanted Jing Qing to be soaked alive. Even though Jing Qing would suffer a lot of pain. There were only two situations. Either he did not want Jing Qing to die, which would be painful, but he was still alive. Or he had a deep hatred and had to use this method to torture her. Moreover, the torture would not be for 1 or 2 years. It would be tens of thousands of years with no end in sight. Her soul was already transparent. Although she was lucky that she did not die in Jing Qing's hands immediately, she would eventually die in his hands. As for asking the grand uncle to kill Jing Qing, it was just to disgust him. Ning Shu was very calm. He did not have any resentment. She was just a piglet that had been fattened up. It was just time to slaughter her. The grand uncle was indifferent to the two's dispute. He was also indifferent to Ning Shu's request. Ning Shu did not know what he meant. The corners of his trench coat fluttered slightly. Behind him was the endless dark void. It made his face as white as a sheet of paper. He stood there and waited for the seal in Jing Qing's body to be broken. He then moved to suppress Jing Qing's body once more, sealing the seal within Jing Qing's body. Jing Qing looked at the grand uncle with resentment. "What do you want? If you want to kill me, then kill me. If you want to cut me, then cut me. Is there any meaning in teasing me like this?" He did not know how much soul power he had used to reopen the seal. In the end, he had to do it again. Where was he going to get soul power? Could it be that absorbing the power of the world in his body would harm his body? Unless it was a last resort, Jing Qing would not harm his body to obtain power. Moreover, if he damaged his body, he would only die faster. He hated the grand uncle to death. Bastard. The person he hated the most in his life was this bastard. This bastard. When they were still in the Law Sea, he had imagined the outside world with him. In the end, he had turned his back on him. When he had climbed out of the Law Sea naked, he had said that he wanted to see the world together. That bastard. Ning Shu burst into laughter. Only the grand uncle was treated as an equal by the Minister of Justice. Ning Shu pressed down on the mark between his eyebrows. "I heard that the laws are higher than the laws. Since the laws cannot deal with you, then let's use the laws." Ning Shu muttered to himself, "I have to hurry. My soul is about to dissipate." Jing Qing looked at the mark that was emitting starlight. "Why are you staring at me and biting me? Didn't senior uncle kill you many times? You should kill him too." Ning Shu shook his head. "I can't kill him in my current situation. To me, killing either of you would have the same effect. I can only focus on one person, so I chose you. Not to mention too, he couldn't even kill one of them. He could only go all out and inflict pain on one of them." Jing Qing seemed to have a sudden realization. "So that's how it is. I've had enough bickering with you. A dog came over to make a fuss. It's time to scram." Then, Ning Shu's remaining soul force was completely absorbed. Her figure was already transparent. Ning Shu's face was solemn. The white mark in his hand slowly turned black. It was pure black and carried a thick aura of death. Ning Shu held the mark and rushed towards Jing Qing. Under the power of the laws, Ning Shu penetrated Jing Qing's body. The black mark stuck to Jing Qing's body and gradually imprinted into it. What was the most powerful thing? Death was the most powerful thing. Life was great, and death was terrifying. Nothing could escape death and decay. Ning Shu smiled. His soul was full of cracks. He looked at Jing Qing, who was shrouded in the aura of death, and was very satisfied. He didn't waste his life fighting. It was just that he didn't see the tragedy of the Sea of Laws collapsing. He died so early. Zheng Qing dug out a piece of flesh from his body. There was a mark on this piece of flesh. Even though the flesh was dug out, the black thing had penetrated deep into his body. He turned his head to look at Ning Shu. Ning Shu stretched out his hand, and the mark returned to his hand. It disappeared in a flash. Even if he died, he would find a place to die elegantly and not in front of Zheng Qing. The Grand Elder made his move. He extended a sword and cut off one of Zheng Qing's arms. This arm was shrouded in the black aura of death and quickly corroded, turning into dust and disappearing. Zheng Qing's face was extremely ugly. It was really ugly to lose an arm. The Grand Elder said indifferently, "If your body is corroded by death, it will be useless." Zheng Qing sneered. "It's useless. It's good that it's useless." The Grand Elder said, "How does it feel to be injured by an ant?" "Zheng Qing, you're getting more and more useless. You." Before Zheng Qing could finish speaking, he was grabbed by the Grand Elder. In a flash, they arrived in front of a huge pool. This pool was made of star stones. In the void, one couldn't see the end of it. The Grand Elder directly threw Zheng Qing in. Zheng Qing struggled in the law of nothingness with a painful expression. He endured the pain of being swallowed and assimilated. However, he was suppressed by the seal above his head and couldn't leave the law of nothingness. He used his only hand to hammer the surface of the water and shouted the Grand Elder's name hoarsely. "Why are you doing this to me? Why? Why?" The Grand Elder stood in the sky and didn't speak. He watched as Zheng Qing's struggle calmed down. Zheng Qing raised his head and looked at him. "Grand Elder, I curse you." The Grand Elder nodded. "Do as you wish. Curses are something that weaklings do. Do you care about that ant cursing you?" Of course, he didn't care. He was already like this. Couldn't he just have some fun with his mouth? The Grand Elder left in the sky, leaving Zheng Qing in pain. Zheng Qing, who had lost an arm, couldn't obtain the energy of the Law Seed to regrow it. In the law of nothingness, he had to maintain the appearance of a one-armed hero. Kacha, kacha. Ning Shu's ears were filled with this sound. His soul was already full of cracks. It would shatter with a light touch. After escaping back to the system space, Ning Shu stood in the system space. He thought about who he should give the peerless martial arts to if he died. Who should he give the world to? There was also the world of reincarnation. There was also the Nine-Palace Mountain in the world of reincarnation. A new world of reincarnation was born. If he died, wouldn't it perish along with his death? Ning Shu opened his hand and looked at the black water droplet imprint. This was good stuff. Death was the ultimate mystery. He was very satisfied to be able to make Zheng Qing feel pain. Ning Shu's heart ached to give this to someone else. Kacha, kacha. There were even more cracks on his soul. Ning Shu felt that if it weren't for the imprint and the world tree, he would have been blown away by the wind. He had to deal with these things before he could die. He had to give it away. For a moment, Ning Shu didn't know who to give it to. Chapter 3093. After absorbing all the stored soul power, he still couldn't resist the collapse of his soul. His roots were already broken, so it was useless to absorb more soul power. Ning Shu couldn't even open the chat system now because his soul was transparent and had no power. He went to the Time City. Ning Shu dragged his collapsing soul to the Time City. He had some revolutionary friendship with the Cheongsam man, so it was suitable to give him some things. He asked him to help him contact one. Since one didn't have any rules, he would give her one and let her become a big boss. It wouldn't be a disgrace to this rule. He also gave the imprint of the law of wood and the law of earth. And the world tree. Yes, the peerless martial arts. The peerless martial arts were a bomb. Even if he gave it to others, no one would want it. The world of reincarnation was not bad. She hoped that someone would treat it well. And the skeleton that she had just made was also made by her painstakingly. She hoped that the person who took it over would continue to cultivate it. The Cheongsam man was richer than her, so he shouldn't be as poor as her. Ning Shu walked into the restaurant and said to the waiter, "I'm looking for your boss." The waiter was speechless. Where was she? Ning Shu said again, "Please call your boss. I have something to tell her." "Okay." The waiter informed the Cheongsam man. The Cheongsam man came downstairs and asked, "Who is looking for me?" The waiter said, "I don't know." Ning Shu said, "It's me." The Cheongsam man furrowed his brows and looked at Ning Shu, who was almost invisible. With a face full of surprise, he asked in shock, "You're really different every time. Why is it this time?" Ning Shu said, "I'm going to die. This time, I'm really done for. I have something to tell you." The Cheongsam man sat down. "You want to tell me your last words? Your soul is so weak. Hurry up and absorb some soul power. Stop talking." Ning Shu shook his head. "I can't absorb soul power. My soul origin has collapsed." The Cheongsam man said, "So, why is it this time?" Ning Shu laughed. "You might not believe me if I tell you this, but I've killed someone at the level of an inquisitor, and I paid with my life." The Cheongsam man was speechless. "Are you out of your mind? Tell me, why are you looking for me?" The Cheongsam man said. Ning Shu stretched out his hand, and the world tree appeared in his palm. The world tree had already withered. "When the soul dissipates, take this world tree. It seems that we found it together." The man in the Cheongsam looked at the tree of world. "It's grown quite well. It's just that it's withered. When it leaves, it'll be very painful. Instead of bickering with me here, why don't you save yourself?" The man in the Cheongsam looked at Ning Shu seriously. "Although I don't know why you seem to be in an accident all the time, we should try to save you if we can. As for your things, I'll definitely take them away when you're really dead. It'll be a waste not to take them." Ning Shu smiled. It was probably the most relaxed smile he had ever had since becoming a mission enforcer. "Although you can't find a girlfriend, you're really a good person." "Cheongsam man, who says you can't find a girlfriend?" Ning Shu suddenly understood why the Cheongsam man's girlfriend chose to die. Immortality didn't exist. When it was time to die, it would die. Ning Shu felt that he was probably waiting for death in a Buddhist land. It didn't matter if there was reincarnation or not. So what if there wasn't reincarnation? It didn't matter. "You're still laughing. What's so funny? Have you lost your mind?" The man in the Cheongsam frowned. "If you don't have the power of the soul, I can lend you some. But you'll have to return it." "Thank you." Ning Shu thanked him and wanted to pull out the world tree. The world tree was rooted in the soul. With such a pull, Ning Shu's soul shattered even faster. "Hurry up and rest. This isn't suicide. If the world tree leaves, you'll be dead too." The man in the Cheongsam used his folding fan to press down Ning Shu's hand. But he couldn't hold it down. The fan pierced through Ning Shu's hand. "I'll help you ask Elder Chi if there's any way. Just you wait. I'll be damned if I believe you." The man in the Cheongsam walked out of the restaurant. Ning Shu didn't think that there would be a way. He was very clear about his situation. He was terminally ill and couldn't be saved. Ning Shu opened his hand. The black water droplet mark was pure black and reflected light. Ning Shu looked at the floating mark. It was good to fall into the embrace of death. Ning Shu used his remaining soul to jump into the black mark like a moth to a flame. Instead of waiting for his soul to dissipate, it was better to merge with the mark and return to death. The man in the cheongsam came back and saw that the person was gone. He pulled the waiter and asked, "Where is he? Where's the soul that was about to die?" "Ah, I didn't notice. He should have left." The waiter was busy serving customers and didn't notice a transparent soul. The man in the cheongsam frowned and opened the chat system. There was no reply from the other side. What was he doing? Didn't he ask him to wait for him to come back? He couldn't have finished playing, right? The man in the cheongsam sighed, but it was just a sigh. He had seen too many deaths on this path. It was normal for the people he was familiar with to disappear and cease to exist. Grand Uncle stood on the Sea of Law. The seawater of the Sea of Law was black and was slowly drying up. The seawater became more and more viscous. The Sea of Law emitted a decaying aura. It was like an old mother moaning. Nothing could stop it from withering away. Grand Uncle squatted down and scooped up the seawater. The seawater flowed through his fingers, leaving behind some unknown black impurities in his palm that emitted a stench. The corpses of the insects that were once floating on the surface of the sea were rotting inside. No one knew whether it was the corpses that contaminated the Sea of Law or if the corpses could really provide energy for the Sea of Law. No one knew, but they couldn't do nothing. Where did Grand Uncle go? Why isn't he back to change shifts? Uncle frowned. I feel that the atmosphere isn't right. Something happened. And he silently dealt with the star stones. Contact someone else to change shifts. Can't that little girl deal with it alone? Contact her. She'll be fine if you coax her more. Don't always give people a hard time. A straight man like you is the least liked by girls. Uncle said as he opened the chat system and contacted her. However, there was no reply for a long time. The feedback from the main system was that this person wasn't online and wasn't in the state of doing missions. Dead? Uncle raised his eyebrows. That's too fast. A meteor has fallen. Looks like we have to continue dealing with it. These people are too lazy now. They only do things that are easy. This won't do. We have to force them. And can you stop talking? Right, I heard that one of your soldiers is husband and wife with that girl. Do you want to tell him that his wife is dead? Uncle said. And he looked at him from the corner of his eyes. Did you gossip about a soldier? Chapter 3094. The man in the cheongsam asked the waiter to prepare a pot of tea. He poured himself a cup and drank it. Suddenly, a looming leg appeared in front of him. The man in the cheongsam spat out the tea in his mouth. Then, a head popped out. It was a looming head with a pale face. There was a black petal-shaped mark between her eyebrows. It was as if a shy girl was peeking out of the door and secretly looking at the outside world. The man in the cheongsam put down his teacup and looked at her in confusion. What are you playing at now? Ning Shu's figure appeared. Her soul spirit was still very weak and would scatter with a gust of wind. She said to the man in the cheongsam, Zhu Li, I'm dead. I'm dead. The man in the cheongsam. A smile appeared on Ning Shu's face, I'm dead. The man in the cheongsam thought, you're crazy. Ning Shu lifted her skirt and ran out of the restaurant. She stood at the door and shouted, I'm dead. She lifted her skirt and the long skirt dragged on the ground. When she turned back, the light shone on her pale face and almost penetrated her transparent soul. A strand of hair stuck to her face. She smiled brightly and the black mark between her eyebrows shone. She was dead. From now on, no one could kill her because she was dead. Only death was eternal. She was death and death was eternal. She could be considered as death walking in the human world. Everything could disappear, but death would not disappear. She was death. Even if her consciousness and consciousness dissipated in the future, a new consciousness would be born. Death would not disappear. Perhaps that consciousness would not be her, but death was eternal. Ning Shu said, "I'm dead. I'm dead." Ning Shu ran around the city of time. She ran to Elder Qi and said, "Elder Qi, I'm dead. I'm dead." Before Elder Qi could say anything, Ning Shu lifted her skirt and ran away. Her snow-white transparent feet stepped on the bluestone floor and brought a fragrant wind with her as she ran through the crowd. Someone turned around to look at her. Ning Shu turned around with a wanton smile on her face. Her hair fluttered in the wind, making her look extremely beautiful. Looking at Ning Shu, a smile appeared on her face. She didn't know that she was smiling, but when she saw the smile on her face, she smiled as well. Ning Shu lifted her skirt and ran back to the restaurant. The Cheongsam man was drinking tea and eating pastries. Ning Shu sat opposite him and poured a cup of tea. The man in the Cheongsam glanced at her. "Can I understand that you're toying with me? You came here looking like you were about to die. What's the situation now?" Ning Shu laughed before saying, "I'm indeed dead. I'm really dead." The Cheongsam man said, "Speak human language." Ning Shu pondered for a moment. "My current state is a little special. Actually, I'm dead, but I'm not dead. I'm living with the will of death." She was death. No one could kill death because death could not die, but death was eternal. Death was immortal. Because all things wither away and die, death is eternal. The Cheongsam man squinted his eyes. "Although I don't really understand, you're not dead now, are you? Will you return the world tree to me?" Ning Shu shook her head. "Of course not. I've already saved it. Why should I return it to you? Did Elder Qian say that there's a way?" "There's no way. There's only death," the Cheongsam man said. Yes, there was only death. Whether it was alive or not, it would all return to the embrace of death. It was just that her soul power was too weak now. She wouldn't die, but that didn't mean that it wouldn't hurt. If she couldn't be killed, it would hurt a lot. Now, her soul was about to dissipate with the wind. It was a very weak and uncomfortable feeling. Even if it was weak, it wouldn't dissipate like a normal soul because she wouldn't die. She was already dead. He couldn't kill her. Even if he destroyed her consciousness, she would still be reborn. She would regain consciousness and form a new personality. "You said that you can lend me your soul power. Is that true?" Ning Shu asked. Her soul power was so weak now. It was uncomfortable. The Cheongsam man said, "Looking at you, I don't think you're going to die." Scram. "I'm not lending it to you. It's just a waste of my feelings." She looked like she was going to die. She really thought that she was going to die. Ning Shu said, "Heartless." Ning Shu asked, "Am I pretty?" "Average. There are too many beautiful women in the organization. You can only be considered average." The Cheongsam man glanced at Ning Shu. "If it's a beauty contest, you can only be in the top 10. Ning Shu was stunned. Then, he smiled. Being in the top 10 was a big compliment. There were hundreds of millions of people in the organization. There were countless mission enforcers and many beautiful women. Being in the top 10 was amazing. Mission enforcers could also modify their souls. There were many attractive female mission enforcers. Life was like summer flowers and death was like autumn leaves. She was probably very beautiful. Ning Shu touched his face. So beautiful. It's so frustrating. Such a beautiful face will accompany me for eternity. It's so satisfying. Sweet trouble. From a face as plain as soup to a face as beautiful as it was now, it was only this face that did not abandon her. It was getting better and better, and she was also getting better and better. The Cheongsam man had just picked up his teacup. When he heard this, he put it down again. He almost vomited the snack he had just eaten. He changed the topic. Why is your soul always fat and thin? It was as if his soul had just become stronger, but it would suddenly disappear with the wind. It recovered, but it would collapse again. What was he playing at? Was this fun? Ning Shu said, "It won't happen again. It won't happen again. In the future, no one would be able to beat or kill her. Otherwise, be obedient and come into my arms." Ning Shu smiled at the Cheongsam man. This time, his smile was bright and beautiful. The Cheongsam man was dazed for a moment. "Thank you for this time. When I have time, I'll treat you to something. In the future, we'll go to the void world to look for treasures." She would not die, but it would be very painful to be pressed down and beaten. When the pressure reached the critical point, her consciousness would collapse and then a new consciousness would be born. But at that time, the new consciousness would be different. It would not be her anymore. It was like renting a house. When the previous tenant left, the next tenant could come. But it would no longer be the previous tenant. The stronger she was, the higher the pressure she could bear. She could do nothing. She could sit aside and support her chin. She could watch the sea of law collapse and everyone be destroyed forever. Obediently, they had all fallen into the embrace of death. Death meant eternal life. The Cheongsam man nodded. Okay, it's a pity for the world tree. She could have inherited some inheritance. Now that she was not dead, it was a joke. Ning Shu opened his hand and the world tree appeared in his palm. Sorry, I can't give it to you. At that time, she was determined to die. Even if she died, His Excellency in the world of reincarnation would not leave her alone. Because that child was born in that world of reincarnation. His Excellency would take care of it and not let the world of reincarnation have any problems. She worried too much. Chapter 3095. As for the peerless martial arts, if he died, there would probably be no one to take over. It could only fend for itself. If there were serious consequences, there would definitely be someone to deal with it. As for his imprint, he was already dead. Who would care if it was still there? Now that he was dead, the imprint would definitely float away. There were originally 4, but now there were only 3. He had just comprehended the law of prophecy, and now the law of prophecy had collapsed. Even if it collapsed, Zheng Qin would definitely be pushed into the law of nothingness. This bit of prophecy would only increase Zheng Qin's distress, but to be able to make Zheng Qin suffer, Ning Shu felt that it was all worth it. Ning Shu lifted her skirt and ran out of the restaurant. She went to the City of Water and City of Wood and strolled around. Fortunately, these imprints were still there. Her basic strength was still there, but now she had an immortal body. Even if her consciousness was destroyed, she could be reborn. At that time, it would be her, but it would also not be her. Ning Shu returned to the system space. The chatting system was ringing. She thought that with the strength of her soul, she would not be able to open the chatting system. If she wanted to think, then let it ring. The most important thing now was to find some soul power. It was not good to be so weak and transparent. It was a pity that she could not show her beautiful face. System scanning, confirming the death of the mission enforcer. The system space is about to be destroyed. The system's mechanical voice came. Ning Shu was clearly in front of her, but the system scanning result was that she was already dead. Destroy the system space. Are you kidding me? Ning Shu immediately said, I'm still alive. I'm still here. Destroy my ass. Her soul was so weak now. She still needed to rely on missions to become stronger. Moreover, she could not leave the organization for the time being. After all, she needed merit grains to cultivate skeletons. The system scanned Ning Shu again. It seemed to be uncertain and repeatedly confirmed. Scan again. Confirmed dead. Ning Shu grinned. She felt that her current state was a bit strange. She was indeed dead, but she still existed. She was dead. The system's scanning result was also correct. Ning Shu said to the system, "Operate the chatting system now and practice with the main system." "I'm still alive." "No, I'm really dead." "I'm still here." The system controlled the chat system and transmitted Ning Shu's words to the main system. The main system replied, "Is the mission enforcer dead?" Ning Shu said, "No, he's not dead." Ning Shu's current state was similar to that of a dead person who had turned into a ghost. To the living, she was dead, but in fact, she still existed. She was real. The main system was probably confused as well. Ning Shu asked the main system to open the video and prepare the video. Although his soul was weak now, it wasn't as if he couldn't see. Although she did not break away from the organization could no longer punish her or kill her. Even if she left the organization, she could still exist forever. From a certain point of view, she belonged to a different level of power. Human weapons could not kill ghosts, not even atomic bombs. They were not on the same level. Seeing that Ning Shu was still there, the main system stopped destroying the system space. However, Ning Shu's status was grayed out, indicating that he was dead. He probably felt that it wasn't good to have a gray zombie account, so he changed Ning Shu's status to red. Therefore, Ning Shu came back to life from the dead state. As for the main system's confusion, let it be. Where could he go to get some soul power? To do tasks. The world of samsara did not collect soul power at all. He couldn't collect much in a short time. He didn't know if there were still people making soul fluid on the second level. He would go and take a stroll. Anyway, his spiritual power had expanded. He would know if there were any soul fluid with a sweep of his spiritual power. Ding dong, ding dong. The chat system kept ringing. Ning Shu said slowly, "What did it say?" "Read it to me." The system said, "The main system sent a message, asking you to go over and change shifts." Ning Shu said, "Oh, tell them to wait." Without the threat of death, Ning Shu felt that she could slow down her pace. Immortality was enough for her to do whatever she wanted. As long as he didn't cut off his own path of survival, he could live as long as he wanted. His previous enthusiasm and panic were only because his life couldn't be guaranteed. Now that his life was guaranteed, he would be putting the cart before the horse. Ding dong. The chat system rang again. The system took the initiative and said, "They are asking when, please go over as soon as possible." "Let them wait. I'll talk about it after I'm done with my own things." The system replied just like that. Ning Shu's attitude was probably too tough. The main system couldn't persuade him to change shifts and wanted to fine him. Ning Shu said, "Punish me as you wish." She said before, she had to do her own things first. Ning Shu opened the black hole and entered the world of samsara. This time, Ning Shu didn't even open an umbrella. This little bit of pollution was nothing to her. Maybe the disaster beast could solve it by itself. Even if the main system fined her, she would just be a little slower in cultivating skeletons. She had plenty of time, so she wasn't afraid of the main system's fines. Ning Shu shouted happily. It felt so good to have someone to rely on. She could say what she wanted and do what she wanted. There were so many people she could handle. If she didn't go, there would be others. Even if she didn't go, the main system would have other candidates. If she went obediently, it would save the main system a lot of trouble. From now on, Ning Shu felt that she would have to say no more often. When the disaster beast was born, she would go up and take a look. Even if her soul was polluted, she wouldn't die, but her mind might be polluted. Ning Shu entered the second level of Nine Palace Mountain. Although her soul was weak and could collapse at any time, she didn't feel the threat of death. Ning Shu used her spiritual energy to scan. Wherever she passed, she would use her spiritual energy to scan. After walking through many places, she didn't see anyone making soul fluid. It seemed like no one was making soul fluid anymore. This world formed a grand cultivation world. There were many sects and schools. There were many new sects and many sects that disappeared. The world was full of vitality, and Ning Shu could clearly feel it. This world didn't just have one main character, but many main characters. Such a big world needed many people to support it. So, Yi Lin didn't even make a single appearance. Did he just disappear into the crowd? Ning Shu felt that he might have done something to Yi Lin and overthrown those cities, causing Yi Lin to have nothing to do. But by the time Yi Lin grew up and overthrew those cities, who knew how long it would take? The world definitely wouldn't change as fast as it did now. Since no one was making soul fluid in the deep mountains and ordinary towns and cities, Ning Shu wanted to go to these sects to see if they had any stock. If the sects had soul fluid, he could exchange it for something. He didn't know if these sects were secretly refining soul fluid. Chapter 3096. Since it was a cultivation world, it needed cultivation resources. Ning Shu had exchanged a lot of spirit stones before, and there was a lot of spirit liquid in the spirit pool. 2 fish swam inside. These things were useless to Ning Shu, and they took up a lot of space. It was good to exchange them for some soul fluid. These sect disciples were in high spirits, wearing the sect's clothes. The men were handsome and the women were beautiful. They stood on flying swords. Ning Shu stood on a disciple's sword. The disciple suddenly felt the sword sink and almost lost control of it. She looked back and saw Ning Shu smiling at her. The disciple said, "Who are you?" The disciples next to her came over and looked at Ning Shu vigilantly. Ning Shu said, "I'm going to your sect. Let's go together." These sects had sect-protecting arrays at their mountain gates, and they were hidden. At first glance, it was impossible to scan them with spiritual power. However, some sects showed their sect's location, but they also had sect-protecting arrays. These disciples were very vigilant against Ning Shu's sudden appearance. Some of them even took out their magic weapons. Ning Shu smiled faintly and floated away. Her laughter was crisp and clear as she floated away. Since he didn't want to go with her, then forget it. Ning Shu found a sect called the Hall of Soul Life. It sounded a little familiar, as if he had heard it before. Ning Shu touched his chin and thought. Probably because he had died once, his memory was not very good. After a while, he remembered that Yi Lin had once said that he would create a sect called the Hall of Soul Life. Ning Shu grinned. This Hall of Soul Life had a forbidden area. What was the use of the forbidden area? It was actually producing soul fluid. The people who had once guarded souls were now producing soul fluid. The people who had sternly suppressed the production of soul fluid were now producing soul fluid. Did this mean that people would eventually live a life they hated? They would forget what they used to be like. Some people caught souls and brought them to the forbidden area. The number of souls caught was not many, and the soul fluid was only produced drop by drop. It was not like before, when pools were produced on a large scale. It wasn't easy to capture a soul now. Ning Shu stood in the sky above the Hall of Soul Life and observed the sect. The sect wasn't considered big. At most, it was a small sect. The secret manuals that ordinary disciples cultivated were not peerless martial arts, but ordinary immortal cultivation secret manuals. It seemed that Yi Lin did not teach peerless martial arts to ordinary disciples. Ning Shu felt that in the end, Yi Lin hadn't been able to hold on. He didn't know why he had started to concoct soul fluid. It was a little inconceivable. Ning Shu called earthworm. Didn't he know that earthworm had changed his diet? Ning Shu felt a little suspicious. Since Yi Lin was producing soul fluid, it was possible that he was feeding soul fluid to the earthworms. Ning Shu shouted at Earthworm for a while, but Earthworm didn't respond. Ning Shu raised his eyebrows. What's going on? Why didn't the Earthworm reply? Could it be that Earthworm wasn't here? Yi Lin was cultivating in the secret room. How could Earthworm not be here? Did it die? Last time they met, Earthworm said that he was going to change his diet. How could it not be here? Ning Shu landed in front of the sect. There was a spirit beast guarding the gate. When it saw Ning Shu, it immediately roared. First, it was to intimidate Ning Shu. Second, it could inform the people of the sect. Soon, a few disciples came out. When they saw the faintly discernible Ning Shu, they were very surprised. Ning Shu said, "I'm looking for your sect master. Tell her that a soul is looking for her. Please inform her." Among these disciples, Ning Shu discovered that a few of them had some luck. With these disciples, the sect would definitely prosper in the future. But now, the production of soul fluid was classified as an evil sect. These disciples shouldn't know that their sect master was producing soul fluid. A disciple looked at Ning Shu and ran in. Not long after, Yi Lin came out. Yi Lin's body was faintly floating with black qi. His strength had increased a lot. He was still a young boy before, but now he had grown up. He looked like a man now. When Yi Lin appeared, these disciples looked at Yi Lin with eyes full of admiration and respect. They all saluted him. Yi Lin smiled. When he saw Ning Shu, he looked for a while before recognizing who it was. He cupped his hands and shouted, "Senior." Ning Shu just nodded, "Where's Earthworm? Why don't I see it?" Yi Lin's face showed sadness. He said to Ning Shu, "Senior, let's talk inside." Ning Shu stepped over the threshold, his skirt dragging on the ground. He followed Yi Lin into the hall. Ning Shu saw Yi Lin's expression and felt that something was wrong. He sat down and asked, "Don't tell me something happened to it." Yi Lin's lips pursed into a straight line. He nodded with difficulty, "It's dead." Ning Shu narrowed his eyes, "How did it die?" Yi Lin sighed and said, "I failed to take good care of it." "I failed to take care of it." Ning Shu asked, "How did it happen?" Yi Lin said, "I went to find Bai Sisi. During that time, I had a conflict with the saint. Something happened to it and it was killed by the saint." Ning Shu didn't understand the situation at that time, but the earthworm's ability to drill into the ground was first class. Its ability to escape was also very good. Moreover, it had soul poison. A bite would definitely let it escape. Ning Shu said indifferently, "Then did you save Bai Sisi?" "That saint was more terrifying than I thought." "They didn't save Bai Sisi. Now, he had to develop his own force. He couldn't do it alone." "I'm sorry." Ning Shu asked, "So you made soul fluid and absorbed it to become stronger?" Yi Lin's expression changed. His face was full of shock, shame, embarrassment, and a bit of killing intent. Then his body withered and he said, "I have no choice. I don't know how to become stronger faster." Ning Shu just snorted and didn't say anything. It was a pity that the earthworm died just like that. They couldn't see each other anymore. The earthworm didn't survive in this world. What about the earthworm's soul? You didn't turn it into soul fluid, did you? Ning Shu asked. No, I don't know where its soul went. Seeing Ning Shu staring at him, Yi Lin was afraid that the other party would suspect him. I swear on my Tao heart. Ning Shu said, your Tao heart is already unstable. Since you started making soul fluid, your Tao heart has been riddled with holes. Yi Lin's face was pale. Ning Shu said, hand over the soul fluid you made. I will give you some cultivation resources. You probably won't let your disciples know that you are doing such an evil thing. You should know the consequences of absorbing soul fluid. Especially impure soul fluid. Even if Ning Shu didn't die now, he wouldn't absorb impure souls. He didn't want to be turned into a madman by the impure soul fluid. Moreover, his whole body was emitting black gas, which affected his beautiful face. Ya Lin had a conflicted expression on his face. The power brought about by absorbing the soul fluid was like taking drugs. It wasn't easy to quit. Chapter 3097. Especially since cultivation was a battle against the heavens, he wouldn't let go of any opportunity to become stronger. Seeing that Ning Shu's soul was so weak, Yi Lin weighed the pros and cons in his heart. If you want to fight, do you think you can still protect your sect? Ning Shu asked. Yi Lin immediately withered and handed over 2 bottles of soul fluid. The bottles weren't big. Ning Shu took them and gave him some spirit stones for cultivation. According to the previous method, have you destroyed your device? Under Ning Shu's gaze, Yi Lin destroyed the device. Ning Shu took a little bit of soul fluid and left. After leaving the 9 Palace Mountain, he went to the pool that collected soul power. There were only a few drops of soul fluid and nothing much. Returning to the system space, Ning Shu put the soul fluid aside. With so little, he was too embarrassed to ask the Chongsam man to send it to the main system for purification. In fact, absorbing it like this was fine. After all, a person who couldn't die wouldn't die no matter how much he pretended. The problem was that Ning Shu didn't want to become a person who was easily angered. I'm so beautiful. If I'm angry, it will affect my beauty. Anger makes people ugly. The chat system kept ringing. It was a message from the main system, asking him to either pick up the fragments or deal with the star stone. It seemed that it was really urgent and was waiting to take over. Probably because the grand uncle wasn't here, there was no one to deal with the star stone. Ning Shu said to the system, "Help me contact His Excellency and ask him if he sells soul power. Use some merit points to buy it from His Excellency. If he doesn't want to sell it, then so be it." The system said, "You have been blacklisted by His Excellency." Ning Shu said, "Contact the other skeletons and ask." His soul was so weak that he couldn't even pick up things. This was not a problem. Even so, Ning Shu wasn't anxious at all. He lay on the sofa leisurely. The system asked and then said to Ning Shu, "They said that these are to be exchanged with the organization. They don't do other transactions." Ning Shu didn't care and said, "Oh." As expected, the organization didn't allow things like soul power to be sold. Only through missions could they obtain the soul power contributed by the entrusting party. This would stop the mission enforcers from speculating and using the power of faith and merit to purchase soul power. Since he had made a deal with the organization, His Excellency would not sell it to anyone else. Since he had set a precedent, there would probably be a swarm of mission takers looking for His Excellency and Skeleton to purchase soul power. Ning Shu touched his face in the mirror. How could such a beautiful face be faintly discernible? Ning Shu touched the black mark between his eyebrows. He had no idea where the law of water had gone. There was only a black mark left. The system said, "The main system sent a message, asking you to change shifts." Ning Shu's gaze didn't leave the mirror. He looked at his face from all angles and said, "He said that my soul is about to dissipate, so I can't do it." The system followed Ning Shu's instructions and replied, "She said her soul is about to dissipate, so she can't do it." The system said, "The main system said that as a mission enforcer, you should accept the assignment." Ning Shu said, "I'm a mission enforcer. It's not like I can handle the celestial stone alone. Isn't it better to spend some money and let a few bosses handle the celestial stone together? Can't you see that my soul is so weak?" "Fine, fine, fine." There was plenty of time to earn the money back. In the days of immortality, if he hurriedly finished everything, what would he do in the future? What she wanted to do now was to admire her beautiful face and deepen her understanding of the law of space. She wanted to go back to her previous world to take a look. She wondered if her parents were still alive and how her two brothers were doing. Was the plane she was born in still there? There were too many planes that had shattered. Was that plane still there? If it had shattered, was her family still alive? Had they moved to another world to live? Or had they shattered into dust along with the plane? Some things had always been suppressed in her heart. She didn't want to think about them, she didn't want to touch them. Because even living was a problem, she didn't have the right to speak. When everything she said was wrong, this kind of extravagant hope was basically an impossible dream. Now, he had enough time to take his time and do whatever he wanted. The system sent Ning Shu's words to the main system. The main system was probably quite frustrated. It didn't insist on letting Ning Shu change shifts to deal with the star stones. Instead, it froze all the resources in Ning Shu's account. Merit and power of faith couldn't be used. It was equivalent to storing money in the bank. The money that belonged to her couldn't be used. Ning Shu was speechless. She had planned to admire her face enough and go deal with the star stones. She also wanted to see if it would be easier for her to deal with the star stones now. In the end, her account was frozen. There was no need to go. She had plenty of time. She would go to the Time City to find the Chongsam man and cooperate with him to go to the Void World. She would find some good things to sell and get some snacks for the little cute skeleton. To be honest, there was nothing she couldn't do to get 100,000 merit points. Since you've frozen my account, I don't have to deal with the star stones for a long time. Dealing with the star stones hurt her soul. Her soul was so weak now. She wouldn't die, but it didn't mean she wouldn't feel pain. The system said, Uncle Chang sent a message to ask you to help deal with it. Senior uncle isn't here. In addition to the 100,000 merit points given by the system, he and he will give you 100,000 each. Hiring one was cheaper than hiring several people. The others were all dealt with by a few people. 100,000 each was not worth it for he who worried about the military expenses every day. Ning Shu held her chin. Senior uncle wasn't here. Did he die with Jingqing? It was quite delightful. Although Ning Shu knew it was impossible. Jingqing definitely couldn't kill senior uncle for the time being. According to the space node given by the other party, Ning Shu built a space tunnel and arrived at the place where the plane shattered. After dealing with the star stones for a long time, Uncle Chang and he were very tired. Seeing Ning Shu come, they didn't care if Ning Shu's soul could handle the star stones now. They quickly let Ning Shu handle it. Ning Shu's soul was thin now. It was difficult for him to pick up tools. However, it was easy for him to deal with the star stones. With a scrape, the star stones were clean. There was no rebound force. It was like scraping off the water stains on the surface. Ning Shu nodded with satisfaction. It seemed that it would be easy to deal with his world in the future. Uncle Chang breathed a sigh of relief. The rebound force of the star stones was the most annoying. Ning Shu dealt with the star stones one by one. Not long after, senior uncle came back. When Uncle Chang saw senior uncle, his tone was somewhat bitter. Where did you go? He was exhausted. Senior uncle looked at Ning Shu, who was dealing with the star stones. You're not dead yet? Ning Shu raised her head and smiled brightly. Her smile could dazzle people. Yes, I'm not dead yet. By the way, is Jingqing dead? If he's not dead, I might go back to visit him when I'm free. After all, we've worked together for a long time. Ning Shu's tone was soft, as if she was saying that she and Jingqing were good friends. Ning Shu stood up and said to senior uncle, since you're here, I'll leave it to you. Ning Shu spread out her hands to Uncle Chang. 100,000 merit points. /BK. Chapter 3098. You asked me to take over the shift, but you didn't say how long it would take. Now that the granduncle was back, it was time for her to leave. But 100,000 merit points couldn't be less. Uncle Chang was speechless. He was usually the one asking for money, but now someone was asking him for money. The granduncle said, "Since you've received the money, you should do it." Ning Shu didn't move, but his eyes turned and glanced at the granduncle. "I did it. 100,000 each time. I've already done it once. Is there anything wrong with 100,000? Ning Shu spread his hands. Is there anything wrong? Uncle Chang didn't say anything. He looked at the granduncle and the two of them, watching the show with his arms crossed. The granduncle frowned, looking a little impatient. Ning Shu took a few steps forward and stood in front of him. "Can we be reasonable? You said 100,000 each time, and they promised me 100,000. What did I do wrong?" Ning Shu approached him again, and the granduncle took 2 steps back, away from Ning Shu. He took a step back, and Ning Shu took a step forward. "I want 100,000 merit points. What's wrong with that? Don't come over." "It's disgusting," the granduncle warned. Ning Shu took another step forward. "I'll come over. What can you do to me? Kill me? Come on. Come and kill me." Uncle Chang almost laughed out loud. After living for so long, this was the first time he saw someone rushing to die. The granduncle pulled out his gun and pointed it at Ning Shu's forehead. "You're so annoying. So what if I kill you?" Ning Shu held the gun barrel and pointed it at his head. "Shoot. Actually, I want to test if I can do it." The granduncle pulled the trigger and fired with a cold expression. The black bullet penetrated Ning Shu's forehead, and there was a finger-sized bullet hole from between his eyebrows to the back of his head. It went through his head. Ning Shu groaned. She raised her head and touched the space between her eyebrows. "It really hurts. It really hurts." Although it hurt, his soul didn't collapse. He didn't die. Uncle Chang's expression became serious, and some of the onlookers looked over. When the Grand Elder saw this, there was no surprise on his face. If the first shot didn't kill him, he fired a second shot. He was annoyed at first, but now that Ning Shu was in such a state, he would feel sorry for himself if he didn't kill him. When people were angry, it was normal to stomp on a caterpillar near their feet. Ning Shu squatted down and avoided the second shot. The feeling of the bullet piercing through his soul was too painful. It was cold and awe-inspiring. It was not a good feeling. He wouldn't stupidly take the second shot. If the other party fired a few more shots, although he could be reborn, it wouldn't be good if his will was erased. Ning Shu stood up and condensed a long sword in his hand. It flickered with a cold luster. Senior Uncle opened fire. Ning Shu dodged the bullet and slashed at Senior Uncle with her sword. Guns were not suitable for close-range fighting. Taishu's face was as cold as iron. He condensed a black sword in his hand. The two swords collided and sparks flew. Clanging sounds rang out as the two swords tried their best to devour each other. Ning Shu condensed a long black whip in his left hand. He retreated quickly and threw the long whip out to entangle the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder stood still and waved his sword, cutting the long whip in half and annihilating it. Ning Shu clicked his tongue twice. She was too weak. Her soul couldn't provide energy at all. She wouldn't die, but it was too difficult to deal with the Grand Elder. The reason why she could hold on until now was because her own will of death had provided her with a lot of energy. Ning Shu's hair was stuck to his face. His expression was solemn. He condensed more power in his sword and rushed over with a fearless attitude like a cannonball. The Grand Elder looked impatient. His body was as straight as a pine tree. He stood still and gently stroked the sword. He lifted the heavy as if it was light, leisurely, and indifferent. The power gushed out from the sword like a trickle. It didn't look like much to outsiders, but Ning Shu, who was locked on, felt the pressure double. This power broke Ning Shu's sword and scratched Ning Shu's face. Half of his face was injured. If Ning Shu hadn't dodged quickly, half of his head would have been cut off. The wound wouldn't heal in a short time. Some kind of power was nibbling at the wound, preventing it from healing. It was also devouring his soul. Ning Shu touched his face. "You fucking hurt my face." It was unforgivable. The onlookers were speechless. It seemed that the focus was a bit wrong. Why was the focus on the face? Ning Shu touched his face. He was particularly distressed. There was a big scar on his originally good-looking face. She looked in the mirror and was in a good mood when she saw her face. It felt great to be awakened by her beauty. The Grand Elder stared at Ning Shu. She should have been devoured and disappeared. He looked at Ning Shu and pondered. Finally, he understood. Ning Shu condensed many swords and rushed toward the Grand Elder. The Grand Elder felt that if they continued fighting, things would be delayed and the surrounding planes would be easily implicated. The most important thing was that the two sides didn't retreat. There was no way out. He didn't know how long the fight would last. The Grand Elder stood out as a peacemaker. He stopped them and said, "Why can't we talk nicely? It's not 100,000. Before he finished speaking, he was knocked away by Ning Shu. The Grand Elder raised his sword and chopped down at Ning Shu's head. Ning Shu blocked the Grand Elder's attack. He condensed a sword with his other hand and stabbed it toward the Grand Elder's heart. He had stabbed Jing Qing's heart before, but Jing Qing was fine. At that time, he was weak. But this time, the sword condensed with the will of death carried death and decay. The Grand Elder took 2 steps back and avoided Ning Shu's sword. Ning Shu's head was split in half. Even so, Ning Shu still didn't die. It was painful. The pain was unreal. The pain of having his head cut open was very intense. "Ning Shu, my face." The Grand Elder, who was knocked away, looked at Ning Shu and then at the Grand Elder. Ning Shu gave up fighting. It was really painful to be beaten up. His foundation was too weak. Slowly, Ning Shu's soul began to heal. It gradually recovered, but his soul looked even weaker. Ning Shu touched his head and face and heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he didn't walk around with his head cut open. She wouldn't die, but when she reached the critical point, her will would be erased. At the critical point, he would be the one at a disadvantage. He wasn't the Grand Elder's opponent for the time being. The Grand Elder stopped him again. "What's there to fight about? You're so angry. Everyone should be harmonious. It's a beautiful tomorrow." Of course, he was angry. Ning Shu was full of anger. As for whether the Grand Elder was angry, he didn't know. Anyway, he felt uncomfortable in his heart. The Grand Elder said calmly, "Sometimes, not dying isn't a lucky thing." Ning Shu flipped his hair. "Whether it's a lucky thing or not, I have the final say." Of course, she understood Taishu's meaning. If one was weak and couldn't die, then death would become the most beautiful extravagant hope. Therefore, in order to avoid pain and torture, Ning Shu had to be strong. /BK Chapter 3099. Uncle Chang narrowed his eyes and looked at Ning Shu. He looked up and down at Ning Shu and said, "So, you got immortality." Ning Shu said, "I'm not talented. I just realized life and death. Immortality doesn't exist." Senior uncle said, "Since you're disobedient, I'll erase your will and give birth to an obedient one." Ning Shu immediately covered her heart and widened her almond-shaped eyes. Wow, you're so abnormal. You're actually going to raise a new me. As soon as she said that, the atmosphere froze. Uncle Chang coughed and said, "Isn't it a matter of 100,000 merit points?" I'll give it. Ning Shu said, "You should have given it. It was a matter of course. What a great gift. You've been wronged." Ning Shu said to Uncle Chang, "Transfer it to my account. If you don't give it to me, I may block the door and ask for it. By the way, tell An he." And he left as soon as her shift changed. He didn't know what happened after that. Ning Shu built a space channel, walked into it with her skirt, and left. There was someone who dared to fight with Senior Uncle and even ran away. The onlookers looked at Senior Uncle. Senior Uncle didn't care about their gazes. His expression was indifferent. He wasn't angry or dignified. The big bosses looked at each other. Now, they were going to add a girl to the list of people they cared about. This kind of person who wasn't afraid of death and couldn't die would be a criminal. Even if she stood still and let you kill her, she couldn't be killed. After killing her, she would recover. It was enough to dishearten people. An undying cockroach might not be strong now, but it was good at disgusting people. Being entangled meant that there would be no peace in the future. The longer you lived, the longer she lived. Until death, she would haunt you like a ghost. Hey, it's so cold. No, this cockroach should be at the top of the list because of her disgusting characteristics. Uncle Chang said to Senior Uncle politely, "There's an uncontrollable one. Do you want to deal with it?" Senior Uncle Chang opened the chat system and told the main system, "Keep an eye on her. Once she does something out of line, erase her will." Uncle Chang smacked his lips. How could such a lass obtain eternal life? They had lived for a long time, but they knew that they would eventually die. It was just a matter of time. No matter how boring their lives were, they never thought of dying. He didn't want to face death. The sword in Taishu's hand disappeared inch by inch as if nothing had happened. Then, he started to process the star stones. The eldest uncle said to the grand elder, "Since this will can't be controlled, changing to another will might be more effective. It might be able to protect these things better. Eternal life, the protection of eternal life." Eldest uncle sighed. The grand elder said indifferently, "It's been too long." "That's true." Uncle Chang nodded. The birth of a new will wasn't something that could be accomplished in a day or two. Ning Shu returned to the system space and looked at his fragile soul. He did not know where he should go to get some soul energy. Could it be that he was going to do a mission? After such a ruckus, Ning Shu felt that the main system would definitely keep a close eye on him. His every move would be under the eyes of others, but Ning Shu did not regret fighting such a battle. Although his head was blown open and he didn't hurt a single hair on the other party, she would definitely die. However, he was certain that she would not die. After being shot once, she would not obediently take a second shot. It wasn't like she wouldn't resist if he caught her and tortured her. Ning Shu looked at his sperm. Fortunately, it had returned to normal. Otherwise, his beauty would be gone. Ning Shu cherished her face very much. Now that her survival was guaranteed, it was time to find something interesting. Now, his soul was so transparent that it couldn't be seen. But it didn't prevent him from seeing a beautiful face. Ding dong. There was the sound of merit entering the account. 200,000 merit points. 100,000 each for Fragrant Wind Man and Uncle Chang. However, it was transferred to his account. Ning Shu's account was frozen by the main system. Even if he had money, he couldn't use it. Ning Shu found the main system. Unfreeze my account. These merit points are mine. Why did you freeze them? Great. I didn't go to work today. It's normal that you don't give me my salary. But you froze my bank card. Hee hee, once it was unfrozen, he would leave some to buy things. The rest would be exchanged for merit points. They would all become merit points. Look at how frozen you are. Main system, it's not time to unfreeze yet. Ning Shu asked, when will it be unfrozen? Main system, depends on the time. So it depended on the organization's mood. Ning Shu shrugged. How long do you want to freeze it? At most, he would cultivate the skeletons slowly. The skeletons he cultivated now were enough to deal with the world of reincarnation. The second world of reincarnation was still evolving. He didn't need skeletons for the time being. Even if the evolution was successful, there would be no soul and no need to manage it. Ning Shu stretched lazily. Now, the most important thing was to strengthen his soul. So, he still had to do missions. The purification ability of the main system was something Ning Shu coveted the most. However, the organization's headquarters was quite mysterious. He didn't know where it was. It relied on the network to connect so many mission enforcers. As for the purification method, it was also hidden. Although Ning Shu coveted it, he wasn't in a hurry. Anyway, he had a lot of time. He would definitely see what he wanted to see. Let's see who dies first. I'll use time to kill you all. Moreover, Ning Shu felt that it wouldn't be easy to create a new Sea of Law. Even if his eldest uncle said that there was a problem with the Sea of Law, there were still many hundreds of thousands of years. However, in these hundreds of thousands of years, Zheng Qing might not be able to create a new Sea of Law even if he soaked in the law of nothingness. This was just a theory. It wasn't certain if it could be realized. It was just a theory. To be able to push Zheng Qing, who had been with him for so many years, into the law of nothingness and hope that the grand uncle would feel sorry for the mission enforcers, it didn't exist. Ning Shu touched his head. He still had some lingering fear. That was really ugly. She didn't know which corner of the pond Zheng Qing was soaking in. She wanted to go and find Zheng Qing. However, his soul was so weak now. If he appeared in front of Zheng Qing, it wouldn't be convincing. He might as well wait until his soul was strong enough to kill Zheng Qing. Zheng Qing's death wouldn't affect the law of nothingness from devouring him. Killing Zheng Qing meant that he had to fight with the grand uncle. Even if she couldn't do anything to Zheng Qing, he would be soaking in the law of nothingness while she wandered outside. Looking at the grand uncle, he should have pushed Zheng Qing into the law of nothingness. At that time, she had hurt Zheng Qing and let him slip away. The grand uncle was really too lame. Ning Shu said to the system, go do missions now. Since he couldn't get soul fluid, he would do missions. If he didn't do missions, his soul would always be so weak. It would hurt to be suppressed and beaten. Moreover, he couldn't die even if he wanted to. /BK Chapter 3100. Until the critical point of destroying her consciousness and willpower, she would be immortal, and she would not even be able to commit suicide. On the phone, in order to avoid being tortured, beaten, or having her consciousness erased, she had to become stronger. Since the Grand Elder said that he could erase her consciousness, there really was a way. These old monsters had lived for too long and knew too many things. Compared to them, she seemed very ignorant and was often looked down upon. Ning Shu exchanged some fasting pills and medicine. He would not die, but it did not mean that the client's body would not die. The system asked, there are difficult and easy missions in the backlog. What difficulty do you want? Ning Shu said, well, randomly draw. If I get the difficult one, I'll do the difficult one, and if I get the easy one, I'll do the easy one. The system said. Let's go according to the urgency of the mission. Ning Shu twisted his neck and warmed up. Okay, anything is fine. She was now at ease and boldly doing missions, trying her best to complete them. Even if she failed, she was not afraid of being erased by the system. It was not like before when she took on a mission with trepidation, afraid that she could not complete it and would be erased. Now, she was not afraid. No matter how difficult the mission was, Ning Shu dared to do it. Failure was no longer at the cost of her life. It was an ordinary mistake. Even if she was erased, she would not die. The system said, "The mission has been chosen. Mission taker, please get ready to enter the plane." When he was teleporting, Ning Shu wondered when he could find the space node of his birth plane and jump back to that plane. Even if he could not do it, he could spend some money to ask the elders to make a space passage. Ning Shu had a lot of time to continue to understand the space system, but he did not know the flow of time in that world. Now, in that world, a day, a year, 10 years, or 1,000 years had passed. If it was a few years, the time span was not big. If it was a few hundred years, or a few thousand years, then the world would have changed, and there would be nothing left. There was a problem with the Sea of Law. There were many broken planes. He hoped that the world was not broken. If he searched world by world, there would be too many planes, and it would take a lot of time. Ning Shu merged into his body, and a sharp pain came from his body. Due to the conflict earlier, Uncle Chang didn't leave. He said to Grand Uncle, "That girl actually went to do a mission and acted as if nothing had happened. I thought she would make a scene for a while." Uncle Zhang could be considered to have experienced that lass's temper. Previously, she had been timid and cowardly, unable to let go of her hands and feet. Now, she had completely let go of her hands and feet. Moreover, she was extravagant. Indeed, strength makes one bold. The Grand Elder said indifferently, "Your soul is so weak. What else can you do if you don't do missions?" Uncle Zhang asked, "Are we really not going to do anything? She's well behaved. If she doesn't cause trouble, we'll keep her. If she causes trouble, we won't keep her." The Grand Uncle didn't care about the person who had suddenly appeared. So what if he was immortal? So what if he couldn't die? Undying was indeed death, but not consciousness. "Oh," eldest uncle replied. "When the time comes, give her body to me. She can be considered a person to be nurtured. Nurture someone who can protect the plane and be of one mind, not someone who only knows how to cause trouble. Furthermore, witnessing the birth of a consciousness, it's quite exciting just thinking about it. Iron-willed straight men like you aren't suitable to raise children. Leave it to me. I will definitely nurture a soft and cute child." Uncle Zhang seemed to have already seen the birth of an ignorant consciousness that was like a blank sheet of paper. Then, he would personally teach it. It was truly an interesting matter. The child that he nurtured would definitely be loved and doted on by the people in the organization. Grow up being doted on by the elders. And, nurturing this bit of fun. He could instill his own thoughts into the other party. Then, he would watch the child slowly grow up. His heart would be very satisfied. Just like planting flowers and trees, it would blossom and bear fruit. The Grand Elder and he were iron-willed straight men. Then, Uncle Zhang was a man who paid attention to feelings and thoughts. If one were to say that he was gay, then he wasn't. However, this tenderness seemed to be a little creepy here. In the world of reincarnation, His Excellency stroked the child's head. The corner of his mouth curled up. "So you did it. What did you do?" The child asked with a face full of curiosity. His eyes were big, and his eyeballs were as black as ink. His eyes reflected bits and pieces of light. "I did what I should have done all along," His Excellency said. His Excellency being placed into the Sea of Law was actually the product of everyone's fanaticism. Because the Sea of Law couldn't hold on anymore, any method that could save the Sea of Law would be tried. Those who said that it was boring were also unwilling to die. They lamented that life was meaningless, but they wouldn't end their boring life. It was so contradictory and pretentious. Humans. The child looked at His Excellency in confusion. His Excellency said, "You will know in the future." The moment Ning Shu merged into this body, the tip of her nose was filled with a thick smell of blood. Moreover, there was also a sharp killing intent that assaulted her face. Ning Shu flipped over and slashed the bedding with a knife. The bedding was stained with blood. "Still hiding? Son of a bitch, my face has been thrown away by you. If I kill you now, I will be killing you on behalf of the judge. Dirty thing, I will be enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens." Ning Shu wiped the blood on her face. A man raised a watermelon knife and slashed towards her. His face was ferocious and filled with hatred, as though there was some deep hatred between them. There were already a few wounds on her body, which meant that before she came, she had already been slashed a few times. The plot was not important, what was important now was to preserve her life. Ning Shu pulled on the door. The door was closed, and it was a wooden door, but it was locked. What deep hatred, to lock her up and then slash her to death. Outside the house, there was a heart-wrenching scream of a woman. "Li Jianming, you can't do this, quickly open the door, I beg you to let her go, she is your daughter, your daughter." Ning Shu, so the fiendish man in front of her, who was slashing her with a knife, was the father of this body. "I don't have such a dirty daughter, talking about her will dirty my mouth." The man spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm, the knife in his hand still dripping blood. He raised the knife and slashed towards Ning Shu, who was in the corner. Ning Shu hugged her head, as though waiting for the butcher's knife to fall. When the man came in front of her, she kicked the man's weak spot. The fiendish man groaned and covered his lower body, his eyes rolled back in pain, and he cried out. Ning Shu grabbed the blanket and covered the man's body. The man's weak spot was injured, and he was covered by the blanket, unable to struggle for a long time. Ning Shu grabbed the stool, and through the thin blanket, she beat the man wildly. As she beat him, she screamed shrilly and stubbornly. Her sharp voice covered the man's cries of pain as she shouted, "Dad, don't kill me, let me go, it hurts so much." There were many people outside the courtyard, some had already called the police, and some villagers were banging on the door from outside, /BK. Chapter 3101. Ning Shu endured the pain in her body and raised the bench to hit the man under the blanket. The man couldn't get out of the blanket and cried out in pain. Seeing that the door was about to open, Ning Shu immediately threw the blanket on the bed. With a bang, the door was pushed open. Everyone saw the man holding a knife and slashing at the girl in the corner who was covered in blood. "Li Jianming, stop it. Stop it." Everyone quickly stopped Li Jianming and found that he was also injured. He had a nosebleed and many parts of his body were bruised. But his condition wasn't as serious as the child in the corner. The girl was covered in blood, holding her head and shivering. She was mumbling something that couldn't be heard clearly. It seemed like she was scared out of her wits. Li Jianming struggled. He was furious. This son of a bitch actually hit him. She even kicked him in the crotch. He had just gotten up but these people were holding him back. It was infuriating. "Let me go. I'm going to kill this bitch. Kill her." Li Jianming waved the knife in his hand. His face was full of anger and grievance. The police stopped him. "What right do you have to kill her? I'm her father. She actually did such a shameless thing. It's so embarrassing. Dirty thing." Li Jianming shouted righteously. "I'm just saving the judge some trouble." "Li Jing, are you in pain?" A woman walked in and saw Ning Shu covered in blood. She didn't dare to touch her. She cried until her face was full of tears. Her originally dark and yellow face looked even worse. "Ning Shu, I'm in pain. Of course I'm in pain." Ning Shu was sent to the hospital. Taking advantage of this gap, she accepted the plot. When she was sent to the hospital, the father kept insulting her as if she would pollute the world by living in this world. He even said that she shouldn't be sent to the hospital and that she should die. Ning Shu didn't care at all. She accepted the plot and sentenced the man to death. The person who commissioned this was called Li Jing. She was only 12 years old. The man who wanted to kill her with a knife and not let her live in this world was Li Jing's biological father. As for why he thought she was dirty, it was because when Li Jing was raped by her stepfather, Li Jianming found out. Then, he wanted to kill his daughter because she was too dirty. Moreover, he was very righteous and wanted to kill her on behalf of the heavens. As for the stepfather, he seemed to have gone to play mahjong. When asked by the police, he directly said that she was not his biological daughter, so why couldn't he do it with her? Li Jing was hacked to death 14 times by her father. The plot was simple. The two men were very righteous. One thought that she was not his biological daughter, so what if he violated her? The other wanted to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and save the judge trouble. To enforce justice on behalf of the heavens was to kill his filthy daughter, to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. If Li Jianming killed Li Jing's stepfather later, Ning Shu could still reluctantly feel that he was enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens and could be considered a man. However, nothing happened to the stepfather. After the client died, he said that the client had seduced him. As for the murderer, Li Jianming, he was naturally punished. However, he was only sentenced to a few years in prison. He also said with certainty that he was not guilty. In fact, there were many unsolved mysteries in the world. Why would there be situations where people were evil to the good and kind to the evil? Most people bullied the weak and feared the strong. Evil people were so evil that people were afraid. The doctor treated the wounds on Ning Shu's body. Some of the wounds were so deep that the bones could be seen. Out of the operating room, Su Feng kept crying by the bed. She cried so much that Ning Shu did not know what to say. It seemed that the two men that this mother married were scumbags. Su Feng cried and said, "What are you going to do in the future? What are you going to do when something like this happens?" What could he do? He had to deal with the two scumbag fathers and then start a new life. He applied for legal protection. The law could not wake up the sleeping person above the power. If you did not look for the law would not look for you. Even if this matter became a big deal, so what? He could apply for a new name and a new identity and still live. As long as he did not live in this place, with so many people in the world, who would always pay attention to him. He could still live in a different place. However, with so many wounds on his body, he could not bleed for nothing. "Don't cry. You're hurting my wounds." Ning Shu grimaced and said. Okay. Mom, don't cry. Why didn't you tell me that something like this happened?" Su Feng asked. When the incident happened, she was working in the factory and was called back. Su Feng worked in a small factory next to her home. She worked overtime and only earned a little more than 1,000 to 2,000 yuan a month. She had to support her daughter and her husband. The client's stepfather usually did not work. He was idle and especially liked to play mahjong. Sometimes, he even used the family's money to gamble. Ning Shu asked, "Mom, will you divorce uncle?" Su Feng was stunned for a moment. She poured a glass of water for Ning Shu and said, "We'll talk about this when you get better." Ning Shu tilted his head and looked at her and said, "It seems that we won't divorce." Jing, Mom has already divorced once. If we divorce again, people will laugh at us. Also, don't make a fuss about this. It won't be good if it gets bigger. You still have to get married in the future. Ning Shu asked again, "Why doesn't uncle do anything and still needs you to support him? Why don't you want to leave him?" Her first marriage had failed, and then she had rushed into her second marriage. The second man was useless. Su Feng was like an old mother. Su Feng worked 12 hours a day. The client did not go to school and had to spend time with an uncle who was not related to her by blood. It would be a waste not to eat a piece of fat meat in front of her. Ning Shu was not surprised that something happened. Also, this could be considered as the scumbag's stepfather betraying Su Feng. Su Feng actually wanted to cover it up. 80% of rape cases were committed by acquaintances. Teachers, classmates, friends, and even biological fathers were all potential rapists. Su Feng sighed and said, "Having a man at home makes me feel more at ease. No one will bully us. With a pillar of support, I feel more at ease. If it's just us, how can we live?" Ning Shu was speechless. It was good to have a man. Even if this man did not do anything, was lazy, and was at the card table every day. As long as there was a man, endless fighting spirit could be ignited in one's heart. An orphan and a widow were pitiful. Even if this man squandered all the things at home, it would be fine if he opened his mouth and stretched out his hand. Wang Zhiyong did nothing but lose money. Without him, the mother and daughter would live a better life. They did not even bear the basic family responsibilities. If something happened, the man would be able to shoulder his own responsibilities. Otherwise, outsiders would bully the family. It was a fantasy. Moreover, it would hurt the family. He understood that after Su Feng got divorced, she wanted to find a man to live with and bear the burden of life. But it was not such a man. She rushed into her second marriage. Chapter 3102. Ning Shu's heart did not waver. Su Feng was probably afraid to face life alone with a daughter. Ning Shu closed his eyes and rested. After this matter was resolved, he would leave and live in another place. People move and live, trees move and die. Why would he stay here when he knew that people would gossip about him? He was afraid of people gossiping and wanted to suppress this matter. Why would he stay here? Ning Shu could not figure it out. The conditions were already so bad. How bad could it be if he changed places? Fortunately, Su Feng did not accuse her of seducing Wang Zhiyong. Although she did not accuse her, she wanted her to suppress this matter. It was not that Su Feng did not feel Ning Shu's coldness, but she also understood. Her daughter had encountered such a thing and her heart ached. She hardened her heart and rushed in front of her ex-husband Li Jianming. Like a madman, she hit and scratched Li Jianming. He scratched Li Jianming's face, leaving streaks of blood. "You're crazy, bitch." Li Jianming glared at Su Feng. Su Feng's heart trembled. "She is your daughter. How can you do this?" If it was not for her good luck, her daughter would have become a corpse now. After giving birth to Li Jing, her stomach did not move for a long time. Just because she did not give birth to a son, Li Jianming did not want her anymore. He insisted on divorcing her and even threw her daughter to her. Regarding Wang Zhiyong doing such a thing to her daughter, Su Feng expressed that she really did not know. Perhaps her daughter did not dare to tell her. Su Feng's heart was about to be torn into two halves. She did not know what to do. Her daughter was ruined, ruined. Su Feng sat on the ground and wailed. Since the incident, she had been crying non-stop. Li Jianming's face was burning. If it was not for the police holding him back, Li Jianming would have beaten her up. After such a thing happened, the police of course had to understand the situation. Wang Zhiyong at the card table was also dragged to the police station. If it was not for her shamelessness, how could such a thing happen? It's already like this and she still has the nerve to live. I'm doing a good thing. Li Jianming sneered. Su Feng was dumbfounded, but she didn't know how to refute. She could only cry. Wang Zhiyong was indifferent and turned a blind eye to Su Feng's crying. He spread his hands and said to the police, "Look, it's not my fault. Even the girl's father said that it's his daughter's fault. Besides, Li Jing and I are not biological father and daughter. It's just a matter between a man and a woman. It's not a rape. Wang Zhiyong was fat. He often sat at the card table and did not do anything. He looked white and fat, like fermented white flour. Su Feng, on the other hand, was dry and dark. The victim was guilty. Su Feng felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't say what it was. Wang Zhiyong was so angry that he didn't know what to say. He said to Su Feng, "Even if I was wrong, I won't do this kind of thing again in the future. Let's just forget about it. You don't want to make trouble, right?" Su Feng was a little doubtful and a little shaken. "Are you really not going to do this kind of thing anymore?" Wang Zhiyong immediately said, "Of course, I won't do it again." If they didn't pursue the matter, Li Jianming and Wang Zhi would definitely be fine. Besides, both of them were Li Jing's fathers. There was filial piety. As for what would happen in the future, Li Jing would definitely be ridiculed. Besides, Wang Zhiyong's promise was worse than a fart. A dog can't change its habit. Li Jianhua said, "And that girl is fine. She even hit me. I'm her father." If Wang Zhiyong was fine, Li Jianming would also be fine. Li Jianming would not drag Wang Zhiyong into this. Su Feng was at a loss. She didn't know if she should believe Wang Zhiyong. Now Wang Zhiyong was her husband. Wang Zhiyong said, "If you really don't want to, let's get a divorce. I believe you. But you have to write a promise that you won't do that kind of thing to Jingjing again." Su Feng was defeated when she heard about divorce. "I can write a promise. With the police as a witness, I won't go back on my word." Wang Zhiyong immediately asked for a pen and paper. After thinking about it, he was too lazy to even write. He asked the police to help him write and he dictated. When Ning Shu woke up, Su Feng took out Wang Zhiyong's promise and showed it to Ning Shu. She said, "Your uncle has promised that he won't do that kind of thing to you again." Ning Shu was speechless. Ning Shu looked at Su Feng in disbelief. What was the use of a promise? What deterrence did it have? Su Feng was in her 30s, but her mind felt like that of a teenager. Women were often swayed by all kinds of words. But when they were given a piece of paper, they were forgiven. The content of the paper made Ning Shu want to laugh. Su Feng saw that Ning Shu was not speaking. She put the paper away, folded it, and put it in her bag. She said to Ning Shu, "Jingjing, you're going to get married in the future. It won't be good for anyone if this gets out of hand." Ning Shu said, "He raped me more than once." "Jingjing, my poor child," Su Feng said as she hugged Ning Shu and cried. Ning Shu was speechless. What did this have to do with her life? It was just a matter of fate. What poor life? This was someone else hurting her. What did it have to do with her life? She could comfort herself and others by saying that she had a poor life. She would say the same thing all the time. Life was also quite innocent. She would push everything onto her life. Ning Shu did not comfort Su Feng as she cried helplessly. He just let her hug him and cry. It was probably because she couldn't cry anymore. Su Feng was a little scared by Ning Shu's calmness. "Jing, don't take things too hard. You are my life. If I wasn't afraid that you wouldn't have a father, I wouldn't have gotten married so quickly. I heard that single-parent families are not good for children. I don't want people to say that you don't have a father. Would a single-parent child have a stepfather to rape her? Get married for the sake of the child." Ning Shu waved his hand, indicating that he would not take the blame. He could not take it. Not getting a divorce was for the sake of the child. Getting a divorce and getting married was also for the sake of the child. The child was about to become the new generation's scapegoat. Wang Zhiyong and Li Jianming were detained at the police station. They would observe the situation first. If they did not pursue the matter, they would definitely be released. After all, it was a family matter. It was just a family matter that had blown up a little. No matter what Su Feng said, Ning Shu did not shake his head or nod. In the end, Su Feng did not know what to say. When Su Feng quietened down, Ning Shu said to Su Feng, "Mom, since you got married for me, then you can also get a divorce for me, right? Then can we get a divorce? Let's move to another place." "What do these rumors have to do with us?" "Move to another place. We can't listen to what others say." The mouths belonged to others. They could not control what others said, but they could choose not to listen. Starting a new life was not bad. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.